The place was truly terrible. It seemed that only devils could live there. It is very easy to die in such a place. And it is almost impossible to survive. Who might like this? Hyun-moo, she felt like he had fallen into the underworld right onto a hot frying pan. There was no strength to even stand up. But I wanted to live even in such a terrible place. And the guy gathered his strength and stood up. The guy was tired of endless dying and was worse than a bitter radish. There seemed to be no end in sight. But then a secluded place was found for Hyun-moo. There, at least you can hide in a corner and know that you won't be attacked from behind or from the side. This gave some chances. The main thing for a guy is to get to a cozy place on time, before he gets hit again on the way. But it was not there. Already halfway there, some creature appeared behind Hyun-moo and immediately began to attack. At first, the guy couldn't even see what kind of freak rained down blows on him. In a few seconds, Hyun-moo was cut, broken and torn into pieces. So agile was the monster that attacked him. Death again took the guy into its bony embrace. His last thoughts were about how much longer this horror could continue. Some time before this, dungeons began to open around the world. People began to realize what was happening and the world smoothly entered a new era. But not everything was rosy for Hyun-moo. The system decided that he had no chance of developing his abilities. His lot was dirty, hard work in the sewers among other poor people like him. People had to manually filter the waste in hopes of catching any remaining mana. Often the working day ended empty-handed. Dirty work in sewers often did not bring any income. The gray days dragged on endlessly in search of a penny to buy food and the most necessary things. Something flashed under the ceiling, foreshadowing good earnings. Hyun-moo perked up and rushed to his find. He almost reached out, He almost held a valuable thing in his fingers. But it almost doesn't count. He fell from all his height and the fetid waves closed around his head, and the stinking liquid seeped under the respirator. The dirty person rushed to help Hyun-moo, walking briskly along the sewer shallows. He stated that everything was fine and not to worry about him. But the person began to energetically pull off her mask to help the guy. It turned out that hiding under the dirty suit was a rather nice girl who sincerely sympathized with Hyun-moo's failure and wanted to cheer him up. She said that there was no way to get it there anyway, and there was no point in trying so hard. The guy agreed with the girl, laughed at his failure, and decided that the game wasn't worth the candle. Meanwhile, on TV they said that the raid led by L and G Tae on Donjin Taibik, 5 stars, ended successfully. The leader of the expedition noted that they owed their success to each member of the expedition. Hyun-moo was pulled away from the screen by a lawyer who said that the guy received an inheritance from his deceased father. This event greatly surprised the guy. And the inheritance itself was very strange. The inheritance turned out to be a shiny yellow thing. Meanwhile, on the news, L and G Tae talked about his successes and plans to the presenter. Hyun-moo wanted to be in the place of the hero. He passionately wanted to escape poverty and be interviewed as a winner. In the end, the guy had nothing to lose. He wanted to test his strength. Hyun-moo tightly clutched the inherited pendant in his fist. Something worked out for him. Something incredible began to happen. Energy spread in all directions. And so Hyun-moo found himself in a strange and incomprehensible place. He didn't understand where he was and why. He was very scared, but there was nowhere to go. He couldn't go back. He didn't even understand where he ended up. It was terribly creepy and cold. It seemed that the air itself was poisoned and every breath was difficult. The guy coughed. He was getting worse. He realized that he would not last long here. He fell to the ground and began to turn inside out. In desperation, he began to scratch the ground with his hands. This was the location, Planet Apocalypse. Difficulty level, Hell. But for Hyun-moo, the worst was just beginning. It turned out that at first there were only flowers. Some stupid creature began to knock the life out of the guy with powerful blows. It seemed to him that he was dying. It was very painful and there was no hope of salvation. There were more and more opponents. This plunged Hyunmi into real horror. He hit right and left, tried to use all his skill and strength, but it seemed that the outcome of the battle was a foregone conclusion. Hyunmi still failed to win. He died. This time. And many, many more times. Countless battles in which the guy used every opportunity to inflict damage on the enemy. Countless defeats and terrible deaths in the clutches of disgusting creatures. But everything has an end, even endless horror. An inscription appeared in front of the guy that the location had been cleared. Hyunmu, she could not believe that he had finally defeated all the creatures that were creeping up on him from 4 sides. Meanwhile, it turned out that even the stars were watching Hyunmu-shi's broadcast. So imperceptibly and unexpectedly, at the cost of incredible efforts, he became popular. In the sewer lines, hard daily labor continued to earn money for food. Often a whole day of hard work, knee-deep in the stinking, infected slurry, did not bring in a penny. But a ray of hope appeared before Hyunmi. He saw a crystal, albeit very high. The guy tried to reach, but he fell into stinking sewage and accidentally choked on the disgusting slop. An excited college employee, Yumin, came running to his aid. But Hyunmi assured that he was fine. Just swallowed a little too much. Yuming said that the water is contaminated with crystal moss mana and is poison for people. To make a few bucks, don't take too many risks and dive into contaminated sewage water. But Hyunmi seemed to care nothing. He seemed quite cheerful and said that he would get better. But the guy's joy turned out to be premature. When he counted his earnings, his mood quickly faded. Hyunmi did not understand how one could live in this world for mere pennies. He worked hard and persistently, but earned very little. 30 years before these events, dungeons began to appear all over the world, in which people awakened superpowers in themselves. Hyunmi did not get any abilities. But I got dirty work for mere pennies. In a series of gray days there was no light, and there was no slightest ray of hope for a better life. Showed up at work with an inheritance from his father. Hyunmi's surprise knew no bounds. He was simply dumbfounded by this news. The inheritance turned out to be a small yellow shiny thing of unknown purpose. But it was clear for sure that Hyunmi would not be able to get rich. But Yuming knew what the yellow pendant really was. She told the guy that it was a stone of return, but he did not understand what it was for. Yumin stated that this is an artifact that hunters use to return from dungeon. The girl naturally noticed that with his talents, Hyunmi had no need to go to dungeons. Yumin realized that she had offended her colleague with her careless statement, and apologized. The guy said that it doesn't bother him at all. But in reality this was not the case. The girl tried to entertain him with news about Hunter L and Jite, but the guy said that he was not interested and said that the bus had already arrived. They said on TV that the leader of the expedition thanked all the participants in the raid for their joint work. The raid on the Daybreak dungeon, 5 stars, was a success thanks to the actions of all members of the expedition. The journalists listened enthusiastically to L and Jite, and admiration was evident in every question she asked. Meanwhile, the leader of the expedition spoke about the pride he felt for the whole world seeing the power of Korea. Lee Jite is not only incredibly strong and rich, but also popular and handsome. The guy looked at his homecoming stone with mixed feelings. I took it in my hand and saw it shine. He decided that he wasn't jealous of L and Jite, but if he had the opportunity, he would take full advantage of it. Hyunmi clenched the stone in his fist, not really hoping for anything, but with a strong desire to change his life for the better. Suddenly, blinding light poured from his fist in different directions. The light intensified every moment. Gradually the light turned into rays diverging from one point, which began to increase at an ever-increasing speed. Suddenly Hyunmi found himself in a line where it scared him terribly. In the first moments, the guy did not understand what was happening around him. But what struck him most was the message that a source of mana had appeared in his body, and the circulation of mana had begun in his body. Hyunmu thought that this was probably some kind of mistake. He did not understand where the mana could come from. Further messages told the guy that he was in the hell location, and he was the only survivor. This completely shocked him. The guy could not understand how he, being at a low level, could get to such a formidable location, and what he would do here. The search for someone alive did not yield any results. Hyunmu couldn't pull himself together and calm down. By chance he saw crystal moss, and of such size that it seemed like a dream to him. The crystal for which he took a bath in the sewer would have cost $30, no more. Hyunmu could not imagine how many thousands or tens of thousands such a huge crystal could cost. It was a real find, promising big money. The guy decided that he had hit the jackpot, and now his life would change. But everything was so simple. He felt bad. Hyunmu alternated between feeling hot and shivering. He began to choke and cough. It seemed that the body was falling apart into 1,000 pieces. A message appeared about the departure of the body and paralysis. Hyunmu couldn't breathe. Stamina levels began to decline. A message appeared that the guy was attacked. But he could not understand who attacked him and from where. There was no one around. A message appeared that Hyunmu had died and the killer was poisonous dust. The guy did not understand how one could survive in a world where even dust was poisonous and could cause fatal damage. However, an inscription appeared, informing that the mission, First Night in Hell, had begun, and the goal was to survive until dawn. Hyunmu began to run without knowing where. He was scared and confused. But gradually anger took over in him. He decided that whoever came up with all this would take revenge on them. But death interrupted his plans. After a dozen deaths, after another revival, he began to pray to all the gods he knew. He simply had no other plans. After another dozen deaths, reports emerged that resistance to toxic substances had increased. Death still overtook Hyunmu more than once. Such an endless cycle of death and rebirth. The new report made it clear that resistance to nerve agents has increased even more. The guy tried to remember how he was previously taught breathing exercises, what the teacher said then. And the teacher said that you need to breathe deeper than usual. And breathe with what is lower than the lungs. Hyunmu remembered that the teacher praised him and said that he was doing well. In fact, the teacher believed that Hyunmu was the only child with great promise. And so, indulging in memories and practicing, the guy moved to a new level. He began to feel incredible lightness in his body. It seemed that his arms and legs could move without effort, and he himself weighed 2 times less. Meanwhile, new reports stated that Hyunmu had received a new skill called Poisonous Blood, and that poisoning no longer harmed him. It seemed incredible, the guy couldn't believe it. Who could have foreseen this? The guy simply breathed poisonous dust and as a reward received immunity to poisoning. Looking around Hyunmu saw that there was crystalline moss all around, and of incredible size. It seemed that this was a dream and that crystalline moss of such size simply did not exist. The appearance of a message that the item in the inventory almost drove the guy out of his mind. Indeed, it turned out that the moss is real and Hyunmu can collect it. At this time, an unusual buzzing sound was heard behind me. The guy turned around to see what could be making such a sound. A living cloud of unknown creatures swarmed and buzzed around him. Unknown bugs or spiders attacked the guy from all sides. He rushed to run as fast as he could, pursued by a noisy living cloud. He had hope of breaking away from his pursuers. But then they overtook him and pitted him all over. Then they got inside and he died. The message said that he was killed by level 3 mosquitoes. But this didn't make it any easier for him. New reports said that he killed 100 mosquitoes at a time and the level of the poisonous blood effect increased. The new notification stated that Hyunmu had contracted an infection and his health would be decreasing by the minute. This world never ceases to amaze. And despair gripped the guy much more often than joy. But there is no silver lining. Although health dropped by 10%, the infection activated the regeneration process. A bunch of messages have appeared, among them a new skill, disassembly. But the guy was sad. This world was too cruel and treacherous. Killing mosquitoes the size of a fist. It's true that there were more opportunities here. He decided to test his new skills on the first chair he came across, wondering why such a skill was needed. And indeed the chair began to disassemble at lightning speed right in the air. Hyun-shi thought this skill was cool, but he didn't see any practical application for it. Since disassembling the object worked so well, the guy decided to create something. Almost immediately he managed to get another skill. This time it was called assembly. Hyun-shi considered this skill much more useful and decided to build himself a shelter without delay. Staying in this terrible world where even dust and mosquitoes were a big threat could drag on for a long time. And the shelter dramatically increased the guy's chances of survival. Besides, it's good to have at least some semblance of a home, a secluded corner. For such a serious matter as creating a shelter, Hyun-shi did not regret it and decided to use his crystal moss. Meanwhile, something light on the floor caught his attention. He bent down to see what it was. It turned out that it was a newspaper. Hyun-shi became interested in what was written there. Meanwhile, a message appeared about a new, foreign language skill. Sometimes it seemed to the guy that any action in this strange world could bring a new skill. There was an article in the newspaper about double star GTL and the guy wondered if he was from the Tae-sun Guild. This thought allowed Hyun-shi to assume that he remained on the same planet. True, he didn't understand what time it was. A terrible thought entered the guy's brain. He tried to drive her away in every possible way, but he could not so easily dismiss such a terrible prospect. Perhaps he was in the future of the planet. It turns out that the world could turn into a terrible place reminiscent of hell. But Hyun-shi decided that even if his guess was correct, he still couldn't do anything about it. Instead of engaging in useless thoughts, it is better to do everyday things. He concentratedly began to sort through the piles of dead mosquitoes. A lot of time has passed and Hyun-shi is terribly tired. He got a bunch of different ingredients. There were the stings of the terrible mosquito, and its wings, and even a particularly valuable ingredient, the blood of the terrible mosquito. But Hyun-shi still didn't know what to do with all this goodness. And why the hell does he need it? He decided to use one of his skills and create something. After some manipulation, he ended up with a dart in his hands. The message made it known that this was a rare hell dart. The dart did not inspire confidence in Hyun-shi. It was somehow too easy to create it. He decided to test it. After all, it was the first weapon he created. He threw a whole bunch of darts, and only stopped when his arms started to fall off. The guy decided to create something else. And then the unexpected happened. He had a large egg in his hands. And reports said that he managed to create his first legendary item. From the notifications, Hyun-shi learned that the egg could be revived, but the chance that the egg was alive was only 50%, and you would have to spend rewards to revive it. The guy became despondent from such news. He didn't want to deal with the egg. And in general, Hyun-shi is tired of this crazy world with all its dangers and difficulties. Rewards and bonuses had to be achieved with great difficulty. But suddenly the guy heard a suspicious rustling. It seemed like someone was nearby. Indeed, a pumped-up freak appeared nearby. He hadn't noticed the guy yet. Based on the characteristic green color and pointed ears, Hyun-shi unmistakably identified the goblin. He could not even imagine that these creatures lived here. Meanwhile, the goblin noticed the guy. The creature let out an angry growl and took up an attack position. Hyun-shi shook in horror. In the first seconds he was simply paralyzed with horror. The goblin, in turn, did not waste time and resolutely began to attack the guy. Hyun-shi took off without hesitation, trying to break away from the evil monster. Then he remembered his inventory. Indeed, there was every chance that there might be something suitable there. The goblin retreated, but not for long. Just to group for a new attack. The message said that in front of the guy was a level 20 red goblin. This message did not add any courage or hope. The goblin rushed to the attack and a serious battle ensued. However, she barely managed to avoid the powerful blows of the green creature. From the look of the goblin, it was clear that he was not going to let the guy live. And he was going to win sooner or later. The creature rushed forward in a powerful leap. However, she released a cloud of darts towards her. The goblin's weapon made a cut on the guy's chest. This completely angered him. One of the hellish darts did hit the green freak in the hand. But However, she understood that such an injection was like a shot to an elephant. But suddenly the goblin's hand began to bubble in the place where the dart hit. The goblin howled, either in pain or in horror. The next moment he swung his formidable weapon. The guy opened his mouth in surprise. The next moment, the goblin's severed hand fell to the floor. However, she decided that he needed to look for such a moron. Indeed, the monster cut off his own hand. The guy's blood was on the darts. And he decided that his blood was so poisonous that the goblin used it. While However was thinking, the insidious monster disappeared somewhere. There were only a few drops of blood left where he stood. The guy began to look around, trying to determine where the green creature had gone. But she was nowhere to be found. Suddenly he jumped on top of However. What could a guy do in such a situation? He didn't have time to dodge. The last clear thought that the guy realized was that he had come to the end. Indeed, in the next moment, the goblin, doing a somersault, slashed However from behind along the back. The goblin managed to knock his opponent to the floor. As a sign of victory, he placed his foot on the back of the defeated However. Fleeing crumbs of consciousness allowed the guy to hear that the goblin growled something. A belated thought occurred to him that goblins, it turns out, can still talk. In fact, the goblin said something contemptuously about little people. And then he added that not everyone had been killed yet. A crooked smile distorted However's face. The remnants of consciousness were leaving his long-suffering head in a trickle. There have been reports that stamina levels have dropped below 10%. But the regeneration mode was activated. However, she found the strength to threaten the goblin and his entire disgusting family. He vowed to avenge his defeat. The guy felt a little better. Meanwhile, a message appeared indicating that the task was successfully completed. It turned out that However did complete the first night in hell task. For this he received a silver chest. To compensate for the difference between his level and the quest level, the silver chest was replaced with a gold one. He was also informed that he could use the Stone of Return. With weak fingers, However felt for the Stone of Return. Then he squeezed it tightly into a fist. The guy ended up in another place. But lying on his back, all he could understand was that it was raining. When he sat down, he froze for a moment in amazement. He couldn't believe his eyes. It turned out that he returned to his world, returned home. After all his misadventures and nightmares, it seemed like a dream. His joy knew no bounds. He didn't just break into a dance. He no longer hoped to see familiar places. Cursing his father, However tore the ill-fated stone from his neck, which doomed him to such trials. The guy wanted with all his might to throw the thing to the ground and trample it under his feet. But he stopped himself. He thought about it, remembered everything that happened to him, the experience and skills he acquired, as well as things and awards, and finally, a kilogram of crystal moss. It turned out that not everything is so simple. A lot of bad things happened to him, but there were also good things. Meanwhile, However was seen bending over the ground with his shirt cut on his back. It turned out to be Yumin. She was shocked to see that the guy was under the deadly rain. She asked Hyunmoo what he was doing in the rain, and why he wasn't hiding. She reminded the guy that it was mana rain and he could get poisoned. Yumin strongly begged Hayamashi to go indoors and finally stop getting wet. In the room, in the light, the guy was a rather pitiful sight. Yuming brought him a special disinfectant that saves him from mana fallout. The girl said that Hayamashi urgently needs to cleanse himself, otherwise he will have big health problems. But the guy stubbornly insisted that he was not poisoned. Yumin literally attacked the guy, proving that he urgently needed to wash himself off, so it would be too late. In the end, he gave in to the girl's pressure and washed himself, at the same time finding out what date it was on the calendar today. It turned out that everything was not at all what Hayamashi thought. The girl brought him out of his thoughts. She asked where he had been. She couldn't reach him and worked alone for 2 days. This was a revelation for Hayamashi. It seemed to him that several years had passed, but it turned out to be only 2 days. Yuming also seemed to be thinking. But she wasn't thinking about what the guy was thinking at all. There was an awkward silence. It dragged on for what seemed like an eternity. Yumin thought that this was Hayamashi and it was better to control herself. She decisively stated that the guy needed clothes and she would now go and buy them. Hyunmoo, she stated that he had the clothes and they weren't going anywhere. The girl said that Hayamashi's clothes are contaminated and should not even be touched, let alone worn. It must be recycled. Yumin said that she would try to return as quickly as possible, and so that the guy would wait for her and not go anywhere. When the girl left, Hayamashi decided to check what he had accumulated in his inventory. His attention was immediately drawn to the golden chest. He remembered that this was a reward for the task. A night spent in hell. Hayamashi really wanted to know what was in the chest. What reward did he receive for his torment in this terrible world? The legendary skill, Help in Battle, made the guy's jaw drop to the ground. He couldn't believe that this was possible. Hayamashi knew that any skill was quite difficult to obtain. And there's nothing to say about the legendary. It didn't fit in his head. As far as the guy knew, only 7 hunters in the world are owners of the legendary skill. It was a real shock for Hayamashi to realize that he became the 8th owner of this treasure in the world. The guy became very excited. He immediately wanted to repeat the techniques he had learned in the other world. But suddenly a puzzled Yumin appeared at the door. She looked at the guy, not daring to say a word. The girl really couldn't imagine that a collector from a sewer was practicing techniques. But still, she decided to ask what Hayamashi was doing. The guy was terribly embarrassed by this. And Yuming said that she would pretend that she didn't see anything. The girl was surprised that Hayamashi was in good shape and was not harmed by the mana rain. But everyone knows that this rain is safe only for those people who have superpowers. The guy finally decided to tell Yuming that he actually has some abilities, but he only recently received them. The girl was amazed. This news from Hayamashi made her think for a long time. The guy reminded Yumin that she told him about her studies on crystal moss research. Hyunmoo asked the girl for help related to her work. Yuming was amazed. She didn't understand how she could help the guy and what her work had to do with it. Hayamashi took out his crystal moss and asked how much moss of this size could cost. The girl's eyes widened to the limit, and her lower jaw dropped. It seemed to her that this could not happen in reality. The guy said that crystal moss weighs about 1 kilogram and weighed it in his hand to prove it. Yuming was left speechless. Is this really possible? Does poor Hayamashi really have such wealth? The guy thought since Yuming was researching crystal moss, she could give him a price guide. When the girl found the power of speech, the first thing she did was ask Hayamashi where he got such a piece of crystal moss. But the guy didn't think it mattered. Yuming said that this is very important because crystal moss of such purity is very rare. Moreover, this piece has 5 stars. Hyunmoo, she asked the girl to help sell such wealth. Of course, you cannot offer such a product to the first person you meet. Yuming was puzzled that it would be quite difficult to sell such large moss. If only there was a smaller piece. At that same second, Hyun-mi broke the moss into two parts. From horror, the girl's face became almost as purple as crystal moss. The girl attacked Hyun-mi with her fists. He hastened to justify himself, saying that he had bigger pieces. The girl didn't believe it at first. She didn't really believe in this piece that she was holding in her hands. But to imagine that Hyun-mi had more than one such treasure was beyond her strength. When Yumin calmed down a little, the guy asked if she would help him sell the moss. The girl naturally agreed. But Hyun-mi put forward two conditions. Firstly, the guy didn't want Yumin to tell anyone where she got the piece of crystal moss from. The second condition was not to say that she was selling the moss for the guy. The girl agreed to all the conditions. She still couldn't get over how easily Hyun-mi broke such a rare and valuable thing. Yu-ming shouted that these were crystals of the highest standard, which could only be obtained in the very first dungeon. Hyun-mi apologized, saying that all these crystals were the same to him and turned to leave because it was already late. He picked up the bag of his infected rags that used to be his clothes. But then Yu-min casually told the guy that he could spend the night with her. What could the guy do? Night gave way to day. The passion for a huge piece of crystal moss has subsided a little. In the morning, Yu-min announced that she was going to a meeting with the buyer to agree on the sale of crystal moss. A meeting with the buyer was supposed to take place in a week. Hyun-mi asked to go to the meeting with the girl just in case. Yu-min said that the guy was worrying in vain. And selling crystal moss is not such a dangerous business. The guy said that, as far as he knows, crystal moss traders are desperate people who do not hesitate to obey the law. To which the girl reasonably noted that Hyun-mi had watched the films. Suddenly the guy twitched and wanted to turn. Yu-ming asked what was the matter. Hyun-mi replied that he had a bad feeling that something might go wrong. Indeed, a suspicious, broad-shouldered guy was sitting in the cafe and staring at the couple who had just entered. Hyun-mi confirmed his premonitions and suspicions and praised himself for going with the girl. But it turned out that the buyer is a completely different person, and he is definitely not a 2-meter strong man. And that suspicious broad-shouldered guy started taking pictures of the cats, which confused the guy. But it was too early to exhale. The buyer said his name was Park Seo and extended his hand for a handshake. The buyer was amazed by Hyun-mi's strong handshake. Hyun-mi kept his ears sharp, expecting an attack or other dangerous situation at any moment. The buyer was also afraid that he would not be able to cope with the guy if he decided to attack. But then the bag of crystal moss was pushed towards the buyer. Everyone held their breath. The tension increased to the limit. Park Seo inspected the goods and was pleased. It seemed that the air itself had thickened from the tension and had to be inhaled with extra effort. The buyer asked the girl whether to transfer the money to the same account. The girl nodded affirmatively. Park Seo politely said goodbye, declaring that he was pleased to deal with such honest people. But Hyun-mi was on alert. This guy was not so easy to fool. Yu-min was surprised and told Hyun-mi that this customer had never said goodbye like that before. The strange behavior of the buyer assured the guy that Park had guessed that he was the miner of crystal moss. Yu-min teased the guy. She chided him that his fears about a knife or a gun from under the counter had never come true. But the girl still encouraged Hyun-mi, saying that anything could happen, even the worst. But this time everything seemed to go smoothly. The girl looked at her phone, intending to show something to Hyun-shi. She handed the guy the phone and asked him how he liked the million in his account. At the same time, the buyer, sitting in the car, reported to his boss that the transaction was successful. During the day, the buyers of crystal moss obtained quite a lot of goods. But what caught their attention the most was the sample they received from Yu-ming. The purity of the moss indicated that it could only be obtained in 5-star dungeons. And this indicated that the hunter who caught such a specimen was very strong. The buyers decided that identifying this hunter would not be easy. Moreover, it could be a foreigner. But it was not clear why a foreigner would sell moss in Korea. The boss asked Park Wai-se about who sold him crystal moss of such purity. The businessman pointed to the girl and her mysterious companion. The boss thanked Park Wai-se for his work, but was in no hurry to forgive his subordinate. He was concerned about the origin of the moss. It was clear to the boss that the hunter who managed to obtain such valuable crystal moss must have had remarkable abilities and strength. Park Wai-se dared to suggest that only a captain could do such a thing. But the boss only laughed in response to this. As a result, Park Wai-se received instructions to collect a dossier on the student and her strange companion. And the instructions to the crystal moss buyer were given by Captain L and G-tae himself. A few days later, Hyunmu was training hard in another world. The training was hard, but the guy was not used to backing down. He literally squeezed out all the power he could. Every movement was worth incredible effort. After 150 push-ups, an exhausted Hyunmu jumped off the horizontal bar and onto the ground. On Earth he could have done 1,000 more push-ups. But in this world everything came with great effort. It was true, and the reward was worth it. Lying on the ground, Hyunmu began to think about how much time he spends in another world. Gradually he began to understand what was what. A lot became clearer for him. It was all about the movement stone. Hyunmu realized that as much time as he spends in hell, the same amount of time passes in real life. But I still don't understand the teleportation itself. Moreover, for some reason the guy constantly teleported to another place. The rest was intuitively quite clear. Although some things still need to be thought out and details installed. But what infuriated Hyunmu most of all was that he was constantly being thrown into some kind of hell. It took a lot of effort to survive there. The guy became sad from sad thoughts. It seemed as if some kind of curse was hanging over him. To distract himself and pull himself together, Hyunmu decided to train. Moreover, I wanted to try the new skill. Assistance in battle. The skill looked like a cheat or hack. But since the system itself gave it to the guy, it means he simply cannot survive at this level without him. The skill remembered the techniques and allowed them to be performed with greater accuracy. He also had the ability to predict the enemy's techniques and strategy. Hyunmu activated Battle Assist and took a good hit of the punching bag. Then he kissed again and again. He developed passion, the speed and accuracy of his strikes constantly increased. Under the hail of blows from Hyunmu, the pair danced as if alive. She even got hot from such an intense attack. The guy himself did not expect such opportunities and results. He was getting more and more into the taste of combat. But the pair could not withstand the pressure, cracked in half and its giblets fell off. Hyunmu really liked this training. Of course, this is completely different from trying it with a real opponent. And yet, skill remembered the guy's movements and regulated their accuracy. While Hyunmu was admiring the result, a new task, companion for a beginner, arrived. To complete it, you had to kill 5 entry-level stuffed animals. Hyunmu immediately thought it was easy. He did not understand why the task was for a beginner, and even an entry-level stuffed animal. Hyunmu did not consider himself a beginner at all. But the guy didn't know where to look for these stuffed animals. He had never seen anything like this before. But what can you do? You need to raise your level. Therefore, Hyunmu went in search of opponents. It took a long time to wander among the gloomy ruins with black gaping windows. There was not a soul anywhere. Finally, Hyunmu found the entrance to the dungeon. This was his last chance to find scarecrows to complete the task. The dungeon was reminiscent of a horror film, with unclear silhouettes peeking out from the darkness. But the guy continued to go down to the basement. Indeed, there were metal effigies in the dungeon. True, opposite their level there was a question mark. Hyunmu had never seen such robots before. They looked dangerous, but did not move. But most of all the guy was surprised by the devilry with the enemy's level. He didn't understand why there was a question mark instead of the level number. and the scarecrows were scary in themselves. Hyunma, she did not understand how it was possible to fight a robot if it was made of iron. The guy imagined how the robots turned into huge metal spiders and went on the attack. He was very terrified by this very thought. The metal scarecrows did not move, but Hyunma, she still decided to be careful and launch an attack from a distance. To test it in combat, he first threw a dart at the nearest metal idol. The dart flew straight to the target, but Hyunma, she did not see the result of the hit. The guy decided to hide out of harm's way and wait in a shelter. Little can be expected from robots. Hyunma, she looked out of the hiding place and saw that everything seemed to be in order. The robots were not moving. The guy decided that it was time to exercise a little, especially since the stuffed animals didn't even think of moving. Hyunmu, she fired with all his might at the nearest metal bastard. He hoped that after such a blow the robot's head would be blown off. But it seems that after the powerful blow there was not the slightest dent or scratch left on the metal monster. But Hyunmu, she howled in pain and began to rub the bruised area. Hyunmu, she thought that even if these robots do not move, fighting them is not that easy. But the robot's eyes glowed with red lights. Signs appeared on which it was written that level 7 scarecrows were starting a level 1 battle. The guy was amazed to see how his opponents brazenly set themselves a level that was equal to his own. This enraged the guy and he rushed into battle without hesitation. The enemy seemed stunned and demoralized. Hyunmu, she decided that these scarecrows were at least not as fast as the goblin, the fight with which he remembered for a long time. Level 7 in real life corresponded to 5 years of military service or work as a bodyguard. In hell, the 7th level is a beginner. Finally, Hyunmu, she decided to put all these levels out of his mind and concentrate on the fight. And he did this on time. The guy activated the help in battle skill and decided to show the metal bastards where the crayfish spend the winter. The robots also did not hurt the rear ones. They quietly surrounded Hyunmu from all sides, grouping for a new attack. Hyunmu, she belatedly realized that a blow from a metal fist was 100 times more painful than a fist made of flesh and bones. But the guy was not going to give up. He used all his skill and accumulated experience by this time. He reflected blows and tried to attack. Sometimes he even succeeded. But still, the robots were quite agile and their muscles were metal, like the heart and all other parts. Finally, Hyunmu, she managed to hit the metal effigy right in the jaw with all his might. But it looks like the paint on the robot was just peeling off a little. No other damage was observed. The guy decided that it didn't work out. He did not understand how he could fight such a strong opponent. But still, as it turned out, he caused damage to the robot. And the robots immediately began a level 2 battle. Metal hands with steel fingers reached out to Hyunmu from all sides. He tried to dodge. There were too many opponents. They started grabbing the guy for anything, not allowing him to swing and carry out at least one blow. Finally, everyone crowded on him in a crowd. Hyunmu was held by his arms and legs. He did not have the slightest chance to move. One of this metal flock stepped aside to get a good run before the blow. Hit Hyunmu's head with all his might. The guy decided that it was the end for him. Lines of messages ran that the density of his tissues was increased, the pain threshold was increased, blood clotting was increased. Hyun felt like he was dying, but it looked like it wasn't the end yet. New reports indicated stamina levels below 10%, as well as regeneration activation. Hyunmu roared from impotence and rage, not metal monsters. The guy seriously considered the option of escape, but decided that in this state he could not run far. Moreover, the robots were on alert, and would have rushed after the guy at the first attempt to escape. Therefore, Hyunmu decided to prepare a small surprise for the metal effigies. Practical to fight such opponents with bare hands, so the guy decided to create something. A good club is often an indispensable tool in a serious fight. And this fight was exactly like that. Hyunmu was pleased to feel the weight of the weapon in his hand. He immediately perked up and decided that all was not lost. Without delay, the guy immediately rushed at the nearest enemy. Hyun-Mishi powerfully hit the robot's arm with his baton. It seemed that this attack did not pass without a trace, like all the others. The scarecrow's arm was broken. For the guy it was akin to victory. Finally, there was a solution to the metal freaks. Eventually the robot's arm came off. This caused Hyun-Mishi to rejoice. But something incomprehensible began to happen to the stump of the hand. It glowed and the smell of ozone appeared in the air. Gradually, the robot's arm began to fold. It seemed incredible. The astonished Hyun-Mishi saw another piece of debris fly near his nose and take its place in his recovering hand. A couple more manipulations, which were accompanied by a metallic clang. And now the robot's hand is in place, like new. Hyun-Mishi was not ready for such tricks. But the robots were not going to stop surprising the guy. They also got weapons. A forest of metal spears, halberds and axes was pointed towards Hyun-Mishi. There was nowhere to go and the guy got into a fighting stance, preparing to fight to the end, no matter what it was. The battle began with renewed vigor. With the assist in battle skill, fighting was much more effective. As a result of the battle, some of the robots found themselves tied to the wall. It's not entirely fair, but Hyun-Mishi needed to somehow get out of the situation. Help in battle was also a great help. The guy simply couldn't have done it without her. Another hail of furious blows from Hyun-Mishi brought a new result. The robot's chest opened up and its metal heart was damaged. As a result, the robot lost control. The guy now understands where the weak point of the robots is and where to hit first. A message appeared that the third-level battle had begun, but Hyun-Mishi did not pay attention to it. He used robots like an hour before he used a pair. The guy realized that the stronger the robots become, the stronger he becomes. But understanding without practice is worthless. The enemy broke the neck of the unwary Hyun-Mishi. After another revival, a powerful blow from another metal scarecrow blew the guy's head off. The next time he was killed by hitting his head on the stone floor. At the same time, the robot managed to almost do a somersault. It seemed as if the robots were programmed with an inexhaustible supply of martial arts. But all the failures and deaths only provoked Hyun-Mishi. He was determined to defeat the metal effigies. The guy tried to carry out a powerful blow, but the robot skillfully dodged. The robot blocked the next kick. The enemy was far from simple and seemed to predict the guy's actions. But Hyun-Mishi did not give up. He acquired dexterity, and was now not afraid to look straight into the red slits of the robot's eyes. But the robot carried out a vile and dishonest attack with lightning speed. The fourth-level battle has begun. He stuck his metal fingers directly into Hyun-Mishi's eyes. The guy fell to the ground and roared in pain. But that was not all. The robot opened its scary glowing mouth and showed a row of huge teeth. The next moment, those terrible teeth grabbed Hyun-Mishi's leg. The guy screamed from indescribable pain. The metal teeth entered human flesh easily, as if through butter. Death came quickly and ended Hyun-Mishi's suffering. About a dozen deaths later, the guy finally realized something. It turned out that the fourth level is the limit for metal stuffed animals. At the same time, the variations of techniques among robots are finite and correspond to approximately level 4. Also undeniable that the robots move according to a prescribed script beyond which they cannot go. If a script is interrupted during execution, the robots begin to slow down while another script is being adapted. Besides, there was no point in tearing robots apart for parts. After receiving a certain amount of damage, the scarecrows turned off on their own. After understanding all these nuances, things became more fun for Hyun-Mishi. When the guy dispersed, the robots flew around the room in which the battle took place, like brooms. The guy didn't even try to hit them completely. He understood the level of damage that leads to their self-shutdown. And now the long-awaited notifications reporting victories began to appear. Hyunmasi methodically cut down enemy after enemy. The excitement of the battle overcame fatigue, and it seemed to the guy that his strength was inexhaustible. Such a state, skill, and well-being was worth all these trials, deaths, and bumps. And when the message came that the task was completed, Hyunmasi fully surrendered to the joy that overwhelmed him. Disabled robots remained on the battlefield, their spare parts and pieces of shell were scattered everywhere. When the excitement of the battle faded, the rejoicing from the victory passed, the guy felt colossal fatigue in all members of his body and decided to lie down right on the floor. Still, Hyunmasi didn't understand why the job was called Rookie Assistant. In his opinion, it was a tough, master-level fight. True, the long and grueling battle helped him memorize the robot's techniques and movements. This was a significant addition to Hyunmasi's knowledge. The tired guy decided to see what he received as a reward for completing this task. After reading that the luck perk increases the value of your rewards, Hyunmasi decided that this was not a bad thing at all. It turned out that the guy received a large yellow scarf as a reward. With any increase in its value, Hyunmasi did not see its practical use. The scarf turned out to be a legendary heavenly cradle item that promoted healing, regeneration, and growth. Suddenly, the thought came to Hyunmasi that maybe he would become wiser if he tied a scarf on his head. No sooner said than done. The guy tied a scarf on his head and seemed to have really wised up. Because he immediately tore the scarf from his head before anyone saw him in such an extravagant outfit. After some thought, the guy decided that he didn't need the scarf. He could not understand how an almost ordinary rag would help him in battle. The best solution Hyunmasi could come up with was to sell the scarf at an auction. After all, the item is legendary, and you could get some money for it. But suddenly the guy saw that he had an egg, which he had previously created from a bunch of killed mosquitoes. Hyunmasi naturally assumed that if the scarf promoted growth, then perhaps it would help the egg mature so that something could hatch from it. The guy decided that the scarf was useless with the egg too. He was about to pick up the handkerchief when the changes began. The places where the egg lay under the scarf began to glow. Then the scales that Hyunmasi had made from the wings of mosquitoes began to fly off the egg. The guy imagined that the egg could hatch into a dinosaur, or even something worse, like a dragon. The egg began to crack and split. The moment of truth was approaching. Finally, a strong light illuminated the egg from the inside and its shell shattered into smithereens. In the first moments, Hyunmasi could not understand what was in the egg. But there was definitely something unusual there. Having looked closely, the guy saw in the place where a minute ago there had been an egg, a little girl sleeping peacefully. But then she woke up and began to wipe her red eyes. It looked very cute and funny at the same time. Hyunmasi decided that this was a fairy. This was indicated by the size of the creature and the presence of wings. The guy had the imprudence to say that the fairy was shorter than one might expect. The tiny creature immediately grabbed the careless Hyunmasi's finger. Sharp teeth grabbed with a death grip. The guy howled from pain and the surprise of the situation. He could not imagine how one could expect such a trick from such a tiny and cute creature. The fairy that flew to the side fell onto the floor and complained that she was hungry. Hyunmasi thought that this award was a great gift. It would definitely be better without him. Moreover, the girl constantly whined that she was hungry, and this unnerved the guy. Hyunmasi managed to dig up a single candy in his bag and without regret he handed it to his ward. But the fairy winced in disgust. This kind of food was definitely not to her taste. This confused Hyunmasi. But the girl herself pointed the guy's finger. He asked if she really wanted blood. The sweet creature's face beamed with a grateful smile. That smile chilled Hyunmasi to the bone. But what can he do? He had to feed the cute little monster with his own blood. It seemed like the fairy would never get enough. The guy was unable to drive her away. Finally, she began to lick the wound to stop the bleeding. The guy winced in disgust at this unpleasant procedure. But on the other hand, what else could you expect from an egg made from mosquito parts? Therefore, Hyunmu had to accept reality, no matter what it was. The fairy praised the guy for his efficiency and delicious lunch. Then the truth called him her slave, which infuriated him. Hyunmu started shaking the fairy, asking what she called him. The fairy said that then he would not be called a slave, but a servant. The guy continued to shake the girl, trying to shake out of her at least a slightly decent name for himself. But apparently, she did not know such names. The guy brought the girl to tears and said that he should be called Hyunmu, and not slave, servant, or butler. She seemed confused from resentment and anger. Finally, the girl squeezed out that she had forgotten her name. Then Hyunmu suggested calling her the Mosquito Fairy, which the girl really didn't like. But this gave her time to come to her senses and remember her name. She told Hyunmu with a sweet smile that she was a post-apocalyptic fairy. The guy had never heard of such fairies. He wanted to find out details about the little creature. The guy asked what her responsibilities were, and whether she should save the world from the apocalypse. But the fairy happily announced that she was not going to save the world, but vowed to devour any living organism that survived the apocalypse. At this moment, Hyunmu remembered that his blood was very, very poisonous. He remembered the goblin's paw bubbling with poison, into which a dart containing a tiny particle of his blood had fallen. But the fairy of the apocalypse was full of food and frightened Hyunmu with tales about the apocalypse. The guy, in turn, thought that the assist in battle skill would not even help from this monster, since she was not hostile and the skill would not work. Hyunmu understood that there was no way to get rid of the fairy. The guy thought how he managed to do this. And the fairy started talking about food again. The guy said that he didn't care that the fairy was going to eat all living things. In addition, he came up with a new name for the fairy. The girl liked the name Ranian and immediately became kinder. Hyunmu was glad that at least the fairy liked something. She explained that in the fairy language the name means harbinger of the apocalypse. The guy decided, just in case, to conduct political information for the fairy and explained that people should not be eaten, at least not himself. But the fairy said, "What if she starves?" To this the guy replied that he would supply her with his blood. This brought the girl into indescribable delight. And she declared that they were foodie fairies. Hyunmu replied that no matter what gourmets there are, you need to eat less blood. Suddenly the fairy asked who it was lying on the floor. Was it people? To which Hyunmu casually replied that these are not people, these are victims of his martial skill. The guy saw the robot body torn in half. It seemed to him that he had never done such a thing during the battle. He didn't have enough strength for this. But everything turned out to be much simpler. There have been reports that the assist in battle skill has received the heroic strength upgrade. This interested the guy very much, and he decided to test his new abilities without delay. Hyunmu knew that practice is always the best test, and theory very often fails at the most necessary moment. The guy quickly accelerated and swung to show everything he was capable of. And he calmly punched a hole in the metal body of the robot, which surprised him beyond words. Hyunmu's joyful exclamations were interrupted by the exclamations of the fairy, who really liked the guy's blow and wanted to try it herself. To the guy's enormous surprise, the fairy's tiny fist caused the robot's body to disassemble itself into spare parts. Suddenly a message appeared that the enemy had been identified and the robots began to move. The robots took a vertical position and moved towards Hyunmu and the fairy. The guy cursed and decided that he would have to repeat the exhausting battle. When the robots came close, a message appeared saying that Hyunmu had been identified as a Superman, and the attack mode was being turned off. The guy didn't understand what kind of Superman the metal buckets with nuts were talking about. Just in case, he took a fighting stance and prepared to repel the attack. But for some reason the robots pointed to Hyunmu at a pile of rubbish near the steps. The guy immediately began to clear the indicated place. It seems the robots no longer wanted to fight, but wanted to cooperate. The fairy showed Hyunmoo where to look. She always smelled something delicious. Under the rubble was a skeleton in a jacket. He seemed to have died right at his desk, with something clutched in his hand. The fairy, looking businesslike, immediately flew up to the skeleton, purring something in her fairy language. Suddenly the fairy grabbed a bone from the skeleton's finger and began gnawing with pleasure. Hyunmoo shuddered in disgust. The guy grabbed the fairy with his fingers and began to shake her again, explaining that people should not be eaten. But the fairy's upbringing ended prematurely, as Hyunmoo finally saw the letter under the skeleton's fingers and began to read it with interest. The letter said that it had been 3 years since the difficulty level had been increased to nightmare. Children died as soon as they were born and took their first breath. Even those with superpowers could not withstand the stress, and one after another passed away. Hopes were fading every day. Humanity was brought to the brink of survival. Hyunmoo gradually began to understand that the hell location where he ended up was actually the future of his world. The most surprising thing for the guy was that even those with superpowers took their own lives. Hyunmoo's attention was diverted by the fairy, who had found something again. It turned out to be the Stone of Return. True, this stone was very different from the one the guy possessed. Hyunmoo tried to take the stone from the fairy, but he failed. The mosquito fairy began to carry out some suspicious manipulations. A bright light appeared around. Hyunmoo was confused and could not understand what was happening. Then the guy realized that the Stone of Return began to work like a magnet and attracted his hand. Hyunmoo could not tear his hand away, the stone was pulling her with such force. The bright light blinded the guy for a while. After some time, the Stone of Return itself let go of Hyunmoo's hand. The guy examined his palm with a sinking heart. But in fact, everything turned out to be not so scary. Instead of terrible burns or bloody naked flesh, the same symbols appeared on Hyunmoo's palm as on the stone itself. The message let the guy know that the stars were watching him. Then the fairy told the guy that he could survive without her and meaningfully waved her hand. Almost immediately, something began to happen to Hyunmoo. The space gained density and it seemed to the guy that he was entangled in it, like in a forest thicket. In the next minutes everything changed. Hyunmoo was moving somewhere, but he couldn't figure out where. There was no up or down, no right or left. The first question the guy asked himself, when he finally stopped moving, was where he could be. The place was very strange. Hyunmoo shouted in different directions, whether there was anyone alive here. The search for a living soul was interrupted by a system message that said that the advancing star Beryl knew that Hyunmoo had swallowed a star fragment. Suddenly something quickly flashed near the guy, leaving behind a shining light. Hyunmoo screamed in surprise and fear. Another message appeared, this time that Beryl was disappointed with the guy's reaction, and he left. This behavior of an unknown creature greatly angered Hyunmoo. The guy started yelling at the unknown creature, how dare it be disappointed in the guy, and who he thought he was. The guy slammed his fist on the message to get more information about the stars and their lives. The information has been unblocked. It turned out that the Lords of the Stars were special creatures who each ruled their own kingdom. The Lords of the Stars will scatter star fragments throughout the universe in order to find worthy candidates to serve the stars and help them expand their domain. The next message said that Hyunmoo had found a star fragment. Gradually it began to dawn on the guy what this all really meant. Hyunmoo realized that the fairy had not found a return stone, but a star fragment. The guy was distracted from his thoughts by a strange hissing sound. He looked up to see if anyone or anything was there. And indeed a mysterious cross appeared in the sky. The guy had never seen anything like this before. Then multicolored lights rushed towards the guy from above. At first he was terribly scared. Then there was a report that the Whispering Star Monstro wanted to develop Hyunmoo's talent for charm. Another message said that the Conquering Star Arden would teach the boy to command an army of fire and steel. Another star promised Hyun-Moo-shi to go in search of the serpent that swallowed this planet. The fourth message said that the Star of Destruction Gaul offers the guy a whole world to rule. Another star promised Hyun-Moo-shi that someday he could become the ruler of the world of the dead. The guy was asked to choose a star, but he responded by yelling that he couldn't choose anything because he didn't understand anything. Information about the stars has appeared. The first to show was Gaul's Star of Destruction, who dealt with strategies and conspiracies. This star rules the masses while remaining unknown, and his main weapon is a yadi or a dagger in the wrong hands. Then it was reported about the Star of Tears Verde, who was the father of grief and sadness, as well as the ruler of the army of the dead. The element of this star was human despair, grief, loss, unfulfilled hopes and hopeless struggle. Then there was information about the hungry star Yogilam, which showed insatiable greed in the form of a huge serpent. Hunger always reigned in the kingdom of this star, and the star itself was going to swallow the entire universe. Next was the Whispering Star Monstrel, who specialized in inciting passions in the light and treachery in the dark. Finally, the Conqueror Star Arden appeared. This star of madness and impotent anger burned everything with flame and cut out all enemies at the root. Hyun-Moo-shi decided that all these stars seemed to have a personality disorder, and that the mental hospital had been crying for them for a long time. A message came that said that the stars are drawn to those who are like them. Hyun-Moo-shi was furious when he realized that the system was hinting that he was an intriguer, a womanizer, a sadist, a maniac with insatiable greed and a whole bunch of other vices. The guy yelled that he might not be a very good person, but it was too much to attribute such a thing to him. But after thinking carefully, Hyun-Moo-shi admitted that perhaps he really was not a good person. On the other hand, the guy also did not observe himself doing very bad things. Nothing so vicious or shameful came to his mind. Hyun-Moo-shi decided that maybe he had forgotten all his bad deeds and that was the whole point. At least the guy decided that he was definitely not as crazy as these deeply vicious stars. But Hyun-Moo-shi was worried about something else. He didn't know what would happen after he made his choice. Then another star approached the guy. She came almost close and began showing pictures. Here Hyun-Moo-shi fights with a bunch of terrible monsters and holds the upper hand over them. Then the guy sees himself as a successful politician in an expensive suit, who is being interviewed. In the next picture, Hyun-Moo-shi is already a world-famous opera singer, who is on stage in a theater crowded with spectators. The next slide shows a guy in military uniform commanding a huge army. Hyun-Moo-shi realized that these were all options for the possible future that the stars could give him in the very near future. But our guy wasn't so simple. He was in no hurry to make his choice. In all this he felt some kind of catch. Then Hyun-Moo-shi asked what was required of him to receive all these benefits. The answer came in a message and was that you just need to serve the chosen star and that's it, there are no other responsibilities. Then Hyun-Moo-shi asked whether it was necessary to make a choice right now. To which I received the answer that the opportunity to choose a star is very rare. It was said that when the stars test you and understand that you are capable of any accomplishment, they will lift you to unprecedented heights of fame and power. As a result, Hyun-Moo-shi became disappointed that the stars could not give him anything right now. The stars, in turn, were outraged by the guy's arrogance. The guy thought that the stars wanted too much from him, and were also indignant. The answer came to him that gaining power and power without effort is of course great, but it doesn't happen that way. To which Hyun-Moo-shi objected that it was the stars that found him, and not he them. Which was indeed true. Hyun-Moo-shi told the stars that he doesn't know them and is seeing them for the first time, but here he is suddenly asked to make a choice that will have consequences for the rest of his life. The guy explained to the stars that things are done differently on Earth. After all, on Earth contracts are signed and certain guarantees are given. A message appeared that Arden the Conqueror had lost interest in Hyun-Moo-shi. To which the guy blithely waved his hand, implying that he wished the star good riddance. Other stars nevertheless listened to Hyun-Moo-shi's demands and said that they would give him time to think, which in itself was already out of the ordinary. The cheerful guy thanked the stars for their care. He liked this development of events better. Hyunmoo she also promised the stars that he would not delay his response. He decided that since the stars made concessions to him, he should not abuse their trust. But then one star approached the guy, which rather puzzled him. Hyunmoo she did not understand what dictated the stars' actions, and whether there was a threat from them. However, the star began to describe strange somersaults right next to the guy. This scared him even more. In the end, the star touched Hyunmoo's hand and he clearly felt the injection that the star gave him. The prick did not look too threatening, but it was also difficult to call such an action friendly. Therefore, the guy was perplexed what this meant and what he should do. But then a message appeared that the monstral star inspired a new legendary skill called Overlord in Hyunmoo. Then the guy realized that the Whispering Star Monstral had given him a generous bribe. Indeed, such a gift may come in handy in the very near future. Hyunmoo thought that the stars are very powerful if they can so easily distribute legendary skills to anyone. The guy then thought that with such power, the stars could easily stop the extinction of humanity, which was dying under the yoke of the hell level. Hyunmoo also thought about the fact that even people with superpowers could not stop the end of the world. Then he decided that there was a possibility that the stars were the authors of the plan that destroyed all life on Earth. In this situation, Hyunmoo decided to collect more information about the stars. He hoped to get answers to his many questions and guesses. 3 days had already passed since the guy returned to his world, but he still could not understand where he was. Making his way through the thickets, Hyunmoo decided that pumping up in hell is not bad at all, but there are important matters that need to be solved in real life. For example, the guy was very annoyed that every time he returned to another place in real life and looked like a seasoned homeless person from whom people shy away. Hyunmoo also seriously thought about buying a house, although such a desire seemed strange and inconsistent. Yumin was also surprised by this guy's plan. She couldn't even understand how he came up with such an idea. Hyunmoo was indignant at why the girl thought his seemingly natural desire was strange and untimely. He asked Yuming what was wrong with that if he wanted his own secluded place where he could hide behind thick walls. The girl explained to Hyunmoo that this was not the case. It's just that although he has a lot of money, he earned it illegally. He is not even registered as a person with superpowers. In his haste, the guy somehow didn't think about it. And indeed, many would have questions about how a person usually got huge money for a good house. Hyunmoo was upset. He realized that he wouldn't be able to see his own home anytime soon. Besides, finding a good home is not so easy. The guy began to go through the options in his mind on what to do in order to eventually acquire his own strong home. The most successful idea seemed to be to register as a user, get a legitimate rank, and then be able to freely manage your own money. Hyunmoo remembered the star who left without waiting for his decision on choosing a star. The guy even regretted that he was given the opportunity to choose only one star. Each of the future options proposed by the stars looked very tempting. It seemed unfair to have to choose only one option. Hyunmoo decided that he needed everything at once. He felt within himself the strength to achieve any goal he set, no matter how lofty it was. Well, it doesn't matter that the apocalypse is coming and none of the people will survive, the guy decided for himself. He decided that he could live alone and become the king of the world. Hyunmoo dreamed that all the stars would simultaneously give him their powers. But at this time, an angry girl interrupted the hero's dreams, yelling that the food had long since cooled down. While eating, the news was broadcast on TV that Captain L and G-tae were going to barricade the Baekdu dungeon and thereby ensure the safety of the people of Korea. Also, the leader of the Tae-sun clan said that it seems that there was a leak from the dungeon and the residents of North Korea had to leave the country. This news scared both guys. This was the first time they had heard of such a leak of monsters from the dungeon into the real world. Moreover, it was a level 5 dungeon, and one could only guess how powerful the creatures were there. Only a weapon charged with mana could cope with such monsters. Yumin said that going into this dungeon is pure suicide, and L and Jite took on this only because he is one of the most powerful hunters of our time. Such terrible news and incredible events aroused great interest in Hyunma. He even stopped eating. And the news that state testing of superpowers would take place in 3 days completely stunned the guy. It was said on TV that the Taesun clan was going to hire recruits to go to Danjin Baekdu next year. Hyunmu decided that he definitely needed to take this test. Yumin tried to redirect the guy's attention to the food so that he could finally undress with what was still left on his plate. Government testing of superpowers was very popular. Hyunmu immediately became depressed, estimating that he would have to wait in line for at least 3 days. Especially how to qualify with such huge competition. The guy behind him and he turned around in anger to see who was so eager to get tested. The men behind him were asked by Hyunma whether he came for the first time for testing, or whether he had been before. The guy was forced to admit that it was really his first time testing. The only time he had been tested before was in boarding school. True, he still didn't understand why only he was tested then. The man said that it was immediately clear that the guy was a newbie and didn't know what was what. It turned out that hunters and novices were not separated in line. Therefore, everyone was mixed up and the result was complete confusion. The guy asked the stranger if he was a hunter, to which he only laughed in response. He stated that he is not a hunter at all, but this is not the first time he comes here to confirm his abilities and thereby prove that he is a valuable member of society. Hyunma decided that such a calculation was actually stupid and the stranger was not really doing anything valuable to society. At the same time, the guy understood that confirmed superpowers dramatically increase his position in society. And it was not surprising that the stranger wanted a better fate for himself. Hyunma continued to think that on the other hand, a registered person with superpowers is in full view of the state, and accordingly is under control. As a result of these thoughts, the guy decided to get the highest possible status, which would allow him to do whatever he wanted. At the check-in counter, Hyunma was informed that the testing would take place in 3 stages. They include identification, characteristics assessment, and skill assessment. The girl behind the counter began to study the guy's papers. Hyunma decided for himself that identification was a normal document check and there shouldn't be any problems with it. The next stage of performance evaluation also seemed quite simple. For this purpose, blood was drawn. After some time, the test results came and everything became known. But Hyunma was most interested in the last stage at which skills will be assessed. To assess skills, a very expensive and highly accurate instrument was used. Skill assessment, in other words, is an assessment of the combat abilities of a potential recruit. The standard for assessing skills is 100 points. But it's not scary to score even less since the test results are summed up. Finally, it was Hyunma's turn to test his skills and find out what he was really capable of. The doctor explained to the guy that there was a ball inside the device that needed to be squeezed with all his might. Indeed, it was not difficult to find the ball in such a small space. Hyunmu did as he was told, but it seemed like something didn't go quite as planned. The doctor's face showed at least severe confusion and bewilderment, if not fear. An employee of the center called another person to help him, and they began to excitedly discuss something. True, Hyunma was not strong in medical terminology and understood practically nothing. The doctors were amazed by the guy's test result. This simply could not happen. It was easier to assume that the device was broken. Hyunma was afraid that he would be accused of damaging expensive equipment. But the employee himself told him to squeeze the ball with all his might. While the doctors were whispering that even when L and Jite took the test, the device did not malfunction, the guy sat on pins and needles, not understanding what was happening. Hyunmu asked if he really damaged the device. But they reassured him in response, saying that everything was fine, just minor technical difficulties. In general, the doctors suggested that the precipitated Hyunmichi take the test again. This time the guy wisely decided not to push the ball with all his might, but to restrain himself so as not to actually break the valuable equipment. But even on the second attempt, Hyunmichi failed to pass the test. The doctors began to confer again in their bird language. As a result, the guy was given the status of under consideration. It sounded like a sentence, only there was much more uncertainty. They announced the creation of 3 queues. Applicants with combat skills went to one, and defensive ones to the second. The third line was for those whose skills are intermediate, or belong to the buff category. With his under consideration status, the guy was confused and had no idea which line he should take. At the check-in counter, they didn't immediately figure out where to identify Hyunmichi next. The guy was asked if his skill was similar to the intermediate one. But how could Hyunmichi answer this? The guy muttered something unintelligible to somehow get out of the awkward situation. The girl behind the counter asked if the guy was going to take the hunter skill test, to which he nodded in the affirmative. Finally, the girl announced that this time there would be an unusual test for hunters, which would be conducted by the Tae-sun clan. The woman further warned that the position of a hunter is fraught with great risks and difficulties. In addition, only a few hunters manage to become millionaires and begin to fully manage their own lives. Most hunters experience only risk and hardship. And to earn a living, they have to spend time on routine work, like all other people. Hyunmichi told the girl that he did not become a hunter for money, which surprised her beyond words. The center employee was even more amazed that the guy was becoming a hunter in order to fulfill his duty to the country. Hyunmichi further explained that there are rumors that the survival of humanity is at risk due to an ever-increasing level of difficulty in dungeons. It is not clear how the girl reacted to the guy's words, but she smiled sweetly, gave him the documents and wished him good luck. To catch up, the employee yelled at the guy to familiarize himself with the dungeon that had been prepared for him. This only made Hyunmichi laugh. After his training in hell, any dungeon could look like a children's sandbox to him. A cavalcade of expensive cars appeared at the state testing center. Soon tall, strong, broad-shouldered men in well-tailored suits emerged from them. But it was the green car that caught the crowd's attention the most. Many people knew who it belonged to. Tae himself easily emerged from the car, as if stealthily. The captain whispered with the employees of the state testing center about something important. Tae also reported that the Red Butterfly team from a rival clan had arrived at the competition. But the captain informed his ward that the Red Butterfly had arrived here not for the sake of competition, but for the sake of an expedition to the north to that very dungeon. The captain further explained that the Red Butterfly has very strong fighters who have never taken part in competitions before. This team came to the competition for the first time now, and only after the expedition to the north was announced. Tae also added that he would take such fighters on the expedition even without competition. But since they want to compete, who is the captain to stop them? Tae also asked if the Red Butterfly had any competitors, to which he was told that they had no equal. The captain also did not fail to take an interest in the unusual guy with rare skills. Tae explained that he is primarily interested in the poisonous blood skill. This is a very rare skill and it can come in handy at the most unexpected moment. The captain studied the test results and thought seriously about this guy and his unusual abilities. On the other hand, this quality also had side effects. Tae noted that if the blood of such a person is shed, his companions may suffer from the poison. But still, the captain decided to take note of the guy. The expedition could encounter a variety of difficulties and who knows who could come in handy in the future. Meanwhile, people began to gather near entrance B. Some looked calm as a boa constrictor, some even managed to take a little nap. Some were looking forward to the results, and some were even anxious. Among this rare crowd of diverse applicants, one could also see Hyunmichi. But then the doors opened, an employee of the center came out and said the guy's name. When Hyamusi approached the man, he handed him a strange small object and left. The guy followed up by asking the man what he handed him, but the man didn't look back. Then Hyamusi shouted after the retreating man, asking him to explain what was happening. But it seemed to be useless, and the guy was left on his own with his thoughts and a small object. At this point, the participants were invited to enter, and the crowd rushed to the door. An announcement was made that this was the dungeon of the Gymnasium No. 3 of the Yongsan Superpower User Bureau. The captain himself approached the applicants and called them hunters in advance, which flattered many. Lee Ji-tae explained that this is a simulation of a 2-star Ukrainian dungeon. The captain also announced that the purpose of the test was to collect the dominoes that each test participant had received before. It turned out that the participants had exactly 3 hours to do everything. L and Ji-tae also announced that the strongest will receive a worthy reward. The losers, as always, will be left with nothing. Hyun-woo rubbed his hands. For him now, training dungeons seemed like child's play, not worth attention. The rules explained that each participant has 1 domino. You can knock out from mobs from 1 to 3 pieces at a time. And then the guys realized that monsters were not the only goal. Each of them is also a goal. One smart guy immediately suggested acting as a team. This greatly increased the chances of success for each group member. Hyunmu looked contemptuously at these passions of the guys, who were worried after the first hit in the dungeon. The guy casually said that he was not interested. He has his own strategy. When the guys turned to him in bewilderment, Hyunmu announced that he would go alone. The applicants stated that they have a healer and a user who can cast a shield, and this significantly increases the chances of survival of the entire team. Hyunmu said that he prefers to work on his own, and besides, he doesn't have to share the dominoes among the team. The applicants began to beg the guy to stay on the team, but he was unshakable. But someone decided that if persuasion does not produce the desired effect on Hyunmu, then it is worth trying other methods of persuasion. A broad-shouldered applicant, 2 meters tall, roughly grabbed the guy by the collar. It was immediately clear that diplomacy was not his strong point. He roared that Hyunmu gave away his chips so that the enemies would not get it. The guy thanked the big guy for reminding him about the chips. This was an unforgivable oversight on Hyunmu's part. The guy smoothly took a fighting stance, without particularly straining. And with the very first blow he silently knocked out the rude man, so that it doesn't bother others. And then he turned to his would-be partners so that they would give him their chips. And to make the applicants move faster, Hyunmu suggested who else wants to fight with him. The bespectacled boy immediately raised his hands up and mumbled that he was giving up without a fight. To which the guy told him not to fool around and not to be cunning, but to give the chip back. The bespectacled boy threw his chip onto the floor without further delay. And Hyunmu thought how easy it was to get it. The applicant explained that Hyunmu knocked out their shield caster, and without this the guys could not fight normally. To which the guy said that they were smart, and made the right decision. He also reassured the bespectacled man that he would not beat them, and he only needed their chips. And it was really necessary to collect other chips, and not get involved in a useless fight. Even the captain himself noticed Hyunmu's actions. He liked that the guy did not miss the chance to rob his comrades. Test managers also observed the red butterfly. Capital reported that these are capable of clearing a level 3 dungeon. The assistant was surprised at the capabilities of the red butterfly, to which the captain said that they were capable of even more. But in this task, capabilities were not particularly important. What was needed here was strength and talent that could lead to victory. And in most cases, the strongest of the strongest win. You also need survival skills to win. Special monsters were created to test these skills. Such a freak is capable of making any applicant show his best fighting qualities. And whoever does not display these qualities will be destroyed. The assistant, in amazement, asked what kind of creature this was. Li Jite proudly announced that this is the latest development of a fully autonomous android prototype. The captain explained that the robot's fists are equipped with amplifiers, and the skin is impregnated with the spores of a monster mushroom obtained in the Chernobyl dungeon. This machine has increased durability, high combat accuracy, and is also protected from mana attacks. Impregnation of the epidermis with fungal spores has regenerative properties and reduces the cost of repairing the robot. It is not difficult to assume that few applicants will be able to resist such a machine. The robot's mere appearance caused terror and made opponents tremble. Although, of course, there were brave souls who tried to oppose something to this perfect machine. But it should be said that such a monster was a worthy opponent even for the red butterfly, let alone others. Even the most skilled hunter will have to tinker with such an enemy. Moreover, even after killing him, the problem will arise of how to get the chips that are inside the very strong body of the robot. While admiring the well-designed android, something distracted the captain's attention. The assistant asked what was the matter, but the enthusiastic L and Jite stopped him mid-sentence. Then the captain explained that Hyunmi met an android in the dungeon, and it was worth watching. The robot actually looked very impressive and menacing. But the guy grinned with satisfaction. He had long wanted to measure his strength with a worthy opponent, since after hell there was nothing to do in this dungeon. Hyunmi was glad that he would finally have the opportunity to warm up, otherwise the task looked rather boring. The guy launched a lightning attack, wondering in the process why the monster wasn't moving. Also, the enemy did not produce any sound and Hyunmi decided that he simply was not equipped with a speech device. Nevertheless, the guy kissed the robot several times. Such an opponent turned out to be quite primitive for Hyunmi. The guy didn't even have time to sweat. The guy thought that the leaders could come up with more complicated tasks, especially considering that they were gathering participants for a serious expedition. Having dealt with a dozen android monsters, Hyunmi became even more bored. It was also not difficult for the guy to get the chips out of this pile of metal and wire scraps. He used his disassembly skill, and in the blink of an eye every screw in the android was unscrewed and every wiring was disconnected. And the chips jumped into Hyunmi's hand. The guy again complained about the ease and primitiveness of the tasks. But on the other hand, Hyunmi thought, the imaginary ease may hide some kind of catch. Therefore, the guy decided to be on the alert, so as not to miss an unexpected danger. At this time, the loudspeaker announced that more than half an hour of competition time had passed. It turned out that 30% of the chips were in the hands of just a few players, and these players will now be announced. In third place is Hong Ryong with 7 dominoes. The red butterfly with 9 dominoes confidently took second place. But the undisputed leader was Hyunmi with 16 dominoes. It was not news to the guy that he was the first, he was so confident in his own abilities. Hyunmi looked at what he could get from his defeated opponents. It turned out to be not thick at all, a couple of pieces of mushroom skin. It seemed nothing remarkable, but it turned out to be very durable. Hyunmi thought that if stuffed animals in the hell location were made from such skin, now it's clear why they are so durable. The guy was confused about how to use such durable material. Experimented with creating different items. And the result was quite good: leggings made of mushroom leather, as well as leggings made of mushroom leather. Hyunmi decided that this was much better than nothing. Any benefits are important because the competition is not over yet. Without wasting any time, the guy went in search of new opponents. At the same time, the red butterfly became furious when she saw that someone managed to collect more chips than her. Very upset, the girl did not even notice that a crowd of less successful applicants was heading towards her. The red butterfly only realized that something was wrong when she heard threatening screams and a crowd preparing to attack her. Still burning with rage, the girl didn't really understand who attacked her and why. She jumped high into the air, trembling with rage and anger. At the top I did a few somersaults to at least a little extinguish my terrible mood. Then the red butterfly rushed down like a kite. Few of the attackers managed to see the shine of the girl's beautiful, piercing eyes. After a couple of moments, the attackers were defeated and brutally laid to the ground. But after the fight, the crowd not only did not thin out, but also increased. Many freeloaders came running to get chips without difficulty. The applicants shouted to the butterfly that she still wouldn't be able to kill everyone on her own. Suddenly, something began to happen behind the red butterfly. The attackers began to scatter in different directions, as if they were caught in a sudden tornado. It turned out that it was not a tornado, it was just Hong Ren's friend. The newcomer began to scold the girl why she broke away from the team. In such a crowd of bloodthirsty people, you can get hurt. Hong Ren recalled that they arrived at the competition with the sole purpose of qualifying for the expedition, and for this they had already collected enough dominoes. Other team members confirmed that they had already collected 88 dominoes, which is more than enough. But the red butterfly did not want to listen to the voice of reason. She was up to something. No amount of persuasion from Hong Ren had any effect on the stubborn girl. She looked back one last time, glanced at her team and said something inaudible. The next moment, Ani soared into the heights like an arrow, and only she was seen. At this time, the captain asked his assistant about the strange guy Hyun-mi. But then L and Ji-tae realized that this was an applicant with poisonous blood. The captain was surprised that the guy felt very confident in the dungeon. This indicated that he had experience. Lee Ji-tae immediately thought that Hyun-mi might be an illegal raider. The assistant reminded the captain that the applicant could be a foreigner. Lee Ji-tae agreed that this option should not be ruled out. But he decided to take note of the guy. The captain also wanted to see how Hyun-mi clashed with the red butterfly. The guy looked very confident in himself, and with a sweet air. Until now, his tests have not been ready. On the other hand, the red butterfly had a level 2 times higher, and it seemed that victory was already in her pocket. At this time, Hyun-mi began chewing the mushroom skin out of hunger. But the skin turned out to be a rare, disgusting thing. No matter how hungry the guy was, such food definitely didn't suit him. Hyun-mi decided to himself that he would have to wash his mouth with soap to get rid of this nasty, acrid taste. Suddenly, his sixth sense told the guy that danger was approaching. It was even a little strange, because Hyun-mi did not meet any worthy opponents in this dungeon. But the guy got ready anyway. A powerful blow hit the guy and fiery butterflies flew around him. It seemed that Hyun-mi should have been ready for the meeting, as his sixth sense told him. But the rapid attack of the red-haired girl stunned him. He relaxed after previous battles, not expecting such agility from anyone. Hyun-mi smiled. Since the lady wants to fight, he will fulfill her wish, and with great pleasure. Although the redhead was beautiful, the guy decided that now was not the time to make eyes at him. Hyun-mi's bravado diminished significantly when he saw that the girl was level 14, and he himself was only level 7. The guy decided to come up with some kind of strategy on how to fight an opponent so superior to him. True, the redhead did not allow Hyun-mi to come to his senses and began to generously beat him with powerful blows. The guy barely had time to dodge the powerful and swift attacks of the red-haired beast. The girl's long legs alternated between trying to tear off Hyun-mi's head and cutting him off. The guy understood that if he missed one single blow, he wouldn't feel enough. He was even surprised that he could withstand such a powerful onslaught of an angry rival for so long. Hyun-mi realized that it was all about help in battle. Without her, he would have long ago been lying lifeless at the feet of this fury. But it was necessary to urgently do something or come up with something to gain an advantage. The guy understood that it was dangerous to rely on skill all the time. The redhead worked like a clockwork. It seemed that fatigue was alien to her body, like snow is alien to the sandy shore with tropical palm trees. But Hyun-mi himself began to slowly lose steam, and it was clear to him that his reaction would soon slow down. The guy decided to test the skill on a redhead, although it was dangerous to try something like that in public. But in the end, her level is 2 times higher than his own. But she rightly decided that there is no place for sentimentality in battle, even if your opponent is a beautiful girl. The guy activated the heroic strength upgrade for the assist in battle skill. The redhead was just launching her next swift attack. But she has already prepared a surprise for her that she will remember for a long time. In a split second before the collision, their eyes met each other, and the guy thought he saw a flash of fear in the girl's eyes. But she still delivered her next powerful blow. And the next moment she screamed in pain and grabbed her injured arm. She only grunted in response. What he thought and felt at that moment is difficult to say. But then the guy rudely told the girl that she was giving away her chips. She threw the bag on the ground and growled that he could take everything. Then the redhead asked what kind of skill he had that she was encountering for the first time in her life. She was just about to respond when he felt threatened again. This time the guy didn't even have time to group himself. Another girl hit him like a cannonball. But still could not understand what was happening to him, and who attacked him. As a result, the guy ended up on the ground. The truth is not so much defeated as taken by surprise and confused. The girl's partner identified Hayamashi and said that he did not expect to meet him. He said his name was Red Snake. Hayamashi thought it was a strong, expressive name. The redhead, in turn, introduced her swift, black-haired partner as Hongrin. When Hong realized that the guy broke her friend's arm, she wanted revenge, but Yuni stopped her. Rising from the ground, Hyunmoo confirmed that he had broken the redhead's arm and asked the black-haired one if she wanted the same. The guy got wound up. He couldn't stand threats, especially from girls, but he was stopped by a message from the loudspeaker. The loudspeaker announced that 3 hours had expired and the competition was over. Hyunmoo realized that he had wasted too much time fighting with the red-haired Yuni. Meanwhile, it was reported that Ha Yun-taek took 3rd place with 21 dominoes. 2nd place, won by Hayamashi with 69 dominoes. In 1st place was the Red Butterfly with 88 dominoes. Yuni turned to Hongrin, not understanding how this could happen. To which the brunette replied that since they are a team, their actions are team actions. Hayamashi slapped his hand on his forehead and muttered that the redhead was deliberately distracting him, while others were collecting dominoes. The upset guy turned around to leave. He decided that he had been outwitted. Hongrin continued to provoke Hyunmoo, saying that after he broke Uni's arm, he couldn't just leave. The guy gathered his strength to restrain himself and not succumb to provocation, otherwise he would completely unmask his own strength. Hyunmoo put himself in the black woman's shoes and decided that she could be understood, because upon arrival she saw her partner with a broken arm and a guy next to her. He decided that it might actually look like he was going to rob the Red Butterfly. But you could have asked to figure out what was what. And yet the guy knew that he had won in a fair fight with an opponent of a higher level. Moreover, it seemed unfair to Hyunmoo that he was cast as a villain. The guy harbored a grudge against these two and decided that they should be taught a good lesson. Hyunmoo silently turned around and uttered only the word, "I command." At this time, Hongrin showered all kinds of curses on the guy. Suddenly Yuni asked her partner what was happening to her. Hyunmoo continued to stand silently and casually against the wall. Hongrin saw the guy's silhouette engulfed in flames, and hordes of terrible monsters swarming around him. It seemed that the black-haired girl was scared to the core. Instead of her friend, she saw a terrible creature with empty eye sockets and a gaping mouth. This became too much for Hongrin to bear. She could no longer resist the obsession. The partners bent over next to the black-haired girl writhing in pain. A rescue team came running. Hyunmoo did not want such serious consequences. He just wanted to teach the harmful girl a lesson. And apparently something really bad happened here. Therefore, the guy decided to sneak away quietly until he was missed. At this time, The captain's assistant was perplexed as to how the guy managed to defeat the girl. He hypothesized that perhaps she had underestimated her opponent. But L&G-tae didn't think so. He explained to his subordinate that Hyunmoo knew very well what he was doing, and his movements were precise and controlled. Especially the guy's results seemed impressive, considering the huge difference in levels between him and the red butterfly. The assistant suggested setting up a meeting with the girl to find out the details firsthand, so to speak. But L&G-tae rejected such an offer. First of all, he wanted to see Hyunmoo. The captain was very interested in this impudent upstart with valuable skills and unknown capabilities. Meanwhile, after the battle, Hyunmoo analyzed the situation. Assistance in battle, even with the heroic strength upgrade, turned out to be quite acceptable for the guy, but the overlord skill drained all the energy out of him. Hyunmoo hoped that his strength and mana would be restored before he moved to the Hell location. Then a big guy approached the guy, clearly in the mood to chat. He introduced himself as Tae-min-soo, deputy captain, and first of all congratulated the guy on successfully passing the test. The big guy handed the guy a card and said that the Tae-sun clan offers him full support in developing his talents and skills. Tae-min-soo said that in their clan, great opportunities open up for the guy and he can reach the greatest heights. To this, Hyunmoo asked if the clan would be able to raise his skills to the level of stars. The captain once again watched the recording of Hyunmoo's fight with the red butterfly. Lee Ji-tae dissected and analyzed every frame of the fight. It was immediately clear that two masters were fighting. The captain, like a seasoned fighter, enjoyed such a high-quality spectacle. For him, it was akin to watching a cool action movie with well-trained actors. The video was interrupted by an assistant who reported that Hyunmoo had refused to cooperate. To this the captain calmly replied that he had assumed something like that. After all, strong and talented people are often too proud. The captain asked the ward about the details of the conversation with the stubborn young man. Tae-min-soo replied that the guy mentioned some stars, but he didn't understand what exactly the guy meant. Therefore, the assistant thought that this was just some kind of youth slang that did not deserve attention. Tae-min-soo also reported that Red Butterfly and her entire team accepted the offer, as previously expected. Lee Ji-tae praised the assistant for his efficiency, and prepared to leave. Tae-min-soo wished the boss a safe journey and a good day. But the captain was already thinking about his own. He was wondering what stars Hyunmoo was talking about. The hunter's grip suggested that this was something very important. Lee Ji-tae decided that it wouldn't hurt to keep an eye on the guy and his friends. Looking at the deserted night road, Yu-ming asked what the guy had. He replied that this was a business card from a recruiting agency, which he received immediately after the tests. But the girl clarified that she was not interested in the business card, but in the box. Indeed, the guy had a box on his lap, the contents of which he had not yet examined. Hyunmoo thought that it was not at all easy to explain where he got this box from. Red Butterfly came to the guy to apologize for her friend Hongrin, who was simply trying to help out her partner. Hyunmoo was incredibly surprised that the Red Butterfly came up to him, and even started with an apology. The guy remembered everything, how the black-haired woman threatened him, and what he did then. He explained to Yuni that he didn't mean to do anything bad, he just wanted to put her in her place. But it didn't turn out pretty at all. But now what can you do? Red Butterfly handed the guy a box and said that this was a prize for first place in testing, and its contents rightfully belonged to Hyunmoo. Yuni added that it is very important for her that Hyunmoo accepts this box. The box contained iron grip gloves that increased strength and blocking. In turn, Yumin reported that another sample of crystal moss was bought by the old buyer Park Yso. Hyunmoo wondered why the old man needed so many crystals and where he got the money to pay for them all. Without a doubt, there was something mysterious, and maybe even dangerous, here. The old buyer had long aroused the guy's suspicions, and now they were confirmed. Looks like he was working for someone very serious. Yu Ming asked the guy if there was anything else in the box, or if the gloves were the whole reward. Hyunwoo Si turned the box over, trying to shake it out if anything had rolled into the lining. A piece of paper fell into his lap, which the guy eagerly picked up and read. It seems Yu Ming was expecting some kind of trick or trouble from this message. But the cheerful guy handed the girl tickets to the restaurant, which were in addition to the gift. This is where hunters live, the couple thought when they approached the restaurant. Fame, honor, money, delicious food. This used to be the ultimate dream of Hyunwoo, but now everything has changed. He knew the future. Yu Min warned the guy to be careful with spending money. To which he replied that it was his money, and he would spend as much as he wanted. Suddenly, Hyunwoo looked back furtively. At first it seemed to him that he was just imagining something. But the next moment the guy realized that someone was watching them. He told the girl to go back into the car, lock herself there and sit silently. Hyunwoo, she also said not to leave the car until he returned. The guy decided to look around for suspicious characters in the area. And indeed, there were 2 suspicious individuals lying around the corner at once. It was clear that they had done a good job with them. A shadow moved in a dark corner, which seemed suspiciously familiar to Hyunwoo Si. Shadow turned out to be a regular customer at Crystal Moss Pack YSO. The old man cheerfully announced that he had saved the guy from the Japanese Yakuza, who were encroaching on his supplies of crystal moss. A suspicious Hyunwoo, she asked the customer what he was doing near his house. To which he replied that he had an offer to cooperate with the Tae-sun clan on excellent terms. To which Hyunwoo, she replied that today he had already refused them once, and he would refuse them again. The old man also said that the Tae-sun clan failed in trying to collect a dossier on him. There was almost no information. Someone thoroughly cleaned the database and removed any mention of Hyunwoo from it. Also, Park Yco says that the guy's test results showed that he is an experienced hunter, but according to documents, until recently he was listed as a sewer cleaner. The old man said that the guy simply couldn't do without the help of the Tae-sun clan, to which Hyunwoo responded with a polite refusal. To this, the client constantly muttered something unintelligible under his breath. Later he added that it seemed he had chosen the wrong method of persuasion, and it was time to try something tougher. The guy tried to shout to the old man, having no desire to fight him. But it seems it was too late to talk to the old man. Grandpa swung his club like a real swordsman, and Hyunwoo could only dodge. Finally, the guy got tired of trying to reason with the stubborn old man. And he gave the pensioner a good punch from the right, hoping that this would calm his ardor a little. The old man turned out to be surprisingly cheerful and active. And it was not possible to calm him down with one blow. Park Yco was surprised in turn when he noticed the guy was wearing hunter gloves, which were the prize in the competition and were awarded to the Red Butterfly. Just in case, Hyunwoo yelled to the amazed grandfather that it was just self-defense. The guy prepared to fight back if the crazy old man decided to attack him again. The old man said that the guy likes to make life difficult for himself. Park Yco looked very serious and determined. Hyunwoo barely recognized him as that harmless old customer. Grandpa said angrily that if a guy doesn't understand in a good way, you will have to talk to him in a bad way. Hyunwoo's grandfather's threats didn't really alarm him at first. But unexpectedly, in the old man's hands, the cane that he was swinging so wildly turned into a sword. With the sword, the old man became even more formidable. Now he looked like a battle-hardened, seasoned warrior. Hyunwoo roared, summoning the combat assistant skill. The sword whistled dashingly in the air, and now the guy understood why Park Y's attacks with a stick earlier reminded him of fencing techniques. Out of harm's way, the guy pushed off powerfully and jumped into the air high above his grandfather's head. Hyunwoo sank far behind the enemy and took a breath, feeling relatively safe. But Grandpa almost immediately closed the distance, and almost touched the guy with a blade-sharp sword. Hyunwoo skillfully passed the sword past him and approached the old man. The next moment, he summoned the superiority skill. The grandfather's face turned into a terrible mask from severe pain. But Hyun-mi continued the attack, since he already realized that he had a fairly strong opponent in front of him. Any delay, any weakening of the grip and the situation will change, and the advantage will return to the enemy. Therefore, Hyun-mi held the old man tightly by the chest, not giving him the opportunity to escape. With his other hand, the guy parried Park Wai's hand holding a sharp sword. But the old man still managed to reach Hyun-mi with the tip of his sword. Blood splashed, black in the evening light. The guy screamed in pain. Hyun-mi grabbed his hand, trying to pinch the edges of the wound to stop the flowing blood. The old man said that he did not intend to hurt the guy and repeated his question about who Hyun-mi works for. But the guy didn't seem to be going to answer Park Wai-seo's question. But he asked his elderly opponent if he had forgotten anything. The old man looked at Hyun-mi in amazement, not understanding what he meant. Seeing the fumes on the weapon where the drops of Hyun-mi's blood were, the old man understood everything. Seo had just so recklessly shed. Then the old man figured out the guy's plan, but it was too late. With his bloody hand, Hyun-mi grabbed the old man right by the mouth. The guy pressed the old man's hand with all his strength so that as much blood as possible would get inside him, and he would get poisoned. The attack turned out to be very effective. Park Wai-seo tried to cough and escape from Hyun-mi's clutches. Finally, the old man managed to charge the guy in the stomach with a straight leg and free his face from the grip. As a result of this, Hyun-mi flew in one direction and the old man in the other. Park Wai-seo started looking for something in his breast pocket. The wounded and exhausted guy became wary. But a bottle appeared in the old man's fingers. Apparently, it contained a healing potion, and the guy stopped fearing a new attack. The old man began to greedily absorb the contents of the jar. Hyun-mi asked the enemy if there was anything left in the jar to share with the wounded man. But the old man froze in amazement that the wounded guy was already on his feet and, moreover, seemed completely unharmed. The old man muttered that he was sure that the sword touched the skin of his palm and cut it. He asked the guy if he had any recovery skills. To which Hyun-mi replied that this was possible and asked the old man if he wanted to continue the fight. In response, the old man only shook his head negatively. This surprised Hyun-mi greatly. The old man had healed, and it did not look at all like he was ready to capitulate. But the old man said that he did not come to fight. To which the guy reasonably stated that Park Wai attacked first. Park Wai-seo again began asking the guy who was behind him, who he was working for. This was already starting to make Hyun-mi angry. He said that he is on his own and does not answer to anyone. The old man then asked where he got all these abilities, to which the guy replied that it was a secret. Park Wai again started the old song about the benefits of working for the Tae-sun clan. The guy said that he swore to himself never to work for anyone. This was the first time the old man had heard such nonsense, and didn't even know how to respond to it. But Hyun-mi went even further and asked Park Wai-se to work for him. The old man decided that during the fight the guy's head had been slightly damaged and therefore there was no point in paying attention to his words. He told Hyun-mi that he was not going to listen to such nonsense, and therefore he was leaving. But the guy thought it would be useful for the old man to work for him. Park Wai had great connections, knew how to do things, and knew a lot. Such a person will be useful in any situation. So he continued to put pressure on the old man. He stated that the Tae-sun clan is far from the strongest. They are inferior to the almighty rank 3 Lotus, and not only to them. Park Wai-seo stopped. Apparently now Hyun-mi's words no longer seemed so nonsense to him. The guy also asked if it seemed to the old man that L and G Tae, as well as the clan as a whole, were greatly overrated. Hyun-mi added that it might be worth being on a team with someone younger and more ambitious. Park Wai-seo replied that either complete fools or people who are in their own fantasies and far from reality can think so. In any case, the old man considered such thoughts idle and stupid. Hyun-mi then asked what he should do to prove that he was better than L and G Tae. Park Wai said that the guy thinks he is too tough, especially considering that he was recently almost beaten by an old man. Hyun-moo, she began to tell Park Wai that the sword would not save him. The old man whistled the blade in front of the guy several times with lightning speed. The guy couldn't keep track of the blade, Park Wai-seo's movements were so fast. The old man scratched Hyun-moo near his ear and said that if he had the intention of killing him, then it would be impossible to resist it. Park Wai said that he had never heard more nonsense from a guy who had not even reached level 10 in his entire life. In response, Hyun-moo only asked what was so unique about L and G-tae. The old man thought for a while, apparently realizing that the guy wouldn't just get rid of him with his stupid ideas. Hyun-moo, she firmly stated that he would prove that he was better than the captain. Then Park Wai-seo informed the guy that Lee Ji-tae had reached level 20 in just half a year. The guy was ready to beat the captain's result. He felt confident and determined to do this. The old man added that the captain was able to achieve such a result only thanks to the support of the clan. If he had acted alone, it would have taken him twice as long. Park Wai-seo suggested that the guy achieve the same result faster than the captain. To this, Hyun-moo replied that he would reach level 20 in 2 weeks. The guy added that if he succeeds, the old man will have to work for him. The old man did not believe so much in the possibility of a guy proving his strength that he did not answer him. Only when he left did he say that he hoped that he had a better place to train than L and G-tae. The guy laughed and said that he had a great place to train. And this excellent place had a very expressive name, Location Hell. To be bored at the hellish location like in real life. The green pointy-eared monster appeared again, whom the guy considered one of the most powerful opponents. Hyun-moo dodged the goblin with a clear, practiced movement. Then the guy launched his own attack, trying to hit the monster right in the head. The goblin didn't miss this opportunity and grabbed Hyun-moo's hand. The guy first howled in pain, but then began to press his bleeding fist into the goblin's wide throat with all his might. The poisonous blood penetrated deep into the throat and body of the green monster. After such a treat, he did not live long and safely gave up the ghost. Almost immediately the guy saw a message that his level had risen to 15. The next message was that the Conqueror's star was watching over you. Hyun-moo shook his bloody fist at the star, but the blood flowed from his hand even more. Although the toxicity of his own blood did not cause any damage to the guy, he still decided to bandage his hand so as not to bleed to death. Almost immediately, the mosquito fairy appeared, attracted by the smell of blood. Hyun-moo was angry with the fairy and asked where she had been for so long and why she didn't help him. But the fairy was occupied with other things. She had already settled down next to the guy's hand and asked what was wrong with his hand and whether she could press there. The fairy began to do her favorite thing, sucking blood. And at this time Hyun-moo was almost throwing up inside out. But the fairy had had enough. And the guy thought that any other companion would be much more useful and prettier. But time did not stand still and the guy needed to look for new opponents in order to level up faster. He has already dealt with a good bunch of all kinds of evil spirits, raising his level quite well. True, Hyun-moo has not yet been able to meet with his old enemy, the goblin in a red hat, who thoroughly offended him. The guy told the fairy how many times the goblin killed him and how much blood he let out. Such a bloody story greatly interested the mosquito fairy. She listened to the guy without stopping. Suddenly the guy felt movement behind him. Hyun-moo broke out in a cold sweat and looked around cautiously. And this time his premonition did not let him down. Behind him was a goblin with a red hat. In place of the hand that he had cut off himself, there was a heavy metal prosthesis. Hyun-moo decided to follow the green freak. Fortunately, he did not notice him. The guy wondered what business brought the goblin here, and how long he would stay here. There is no trace of the mosquito fairy. The place where she had been a second ago was empty. Hyun-moo swore that the little reptile had drunk his fill of blood and had taken flight at the first danger. The guy decided to deal with the fairy another time, Now his attention was entirely occupied by the goblin. Meanwhile, he saw a bunch of his own relatives who had been killed by Hyunmishi and let out a drawn-out, blood-curdling scream. Then the goblin noticed the guy and growled, at which he stared. Hyunmishi thought it was quite strange that such a vile creature would be killed because of the death of its relatives. The guy growled at the green widow to come closer because he didn't have time. An ominous red light appeared in the goblin's small eye sockets. He growled more than ever, realizing that it was Hyunmishi who had interrupted his relatives. The next moment the guy was killed. But the quest, "Enemies on the Wooden Bridge," appeared. And the first target was the goblin with the black hand. After the next murder, Hyunmishi decided to lie down. He still couldn't control the angry goblin. The guy was even surprised how vindictive and stubborn the goblin was, and he didn't get tired of killing him so many times. By inertia, Hyunmishi fought with the pointy-eared monster, trying to do something. But after another death, I realized that this monster could not be beaten so easily. It was necessary to come up with some kind of strategy, or plan. But as soon as Hyunmishi started to get up, a goblin appeared. A few moments, and he sent the guy into a deep knockout. So he didn't even have enough time to come up with something. Hyunmishi chided himself for remembering the goblin and looking for him for so long. And now he can't do anything about him. After the next resurrection, the guy began to run with all his might, hoping that he would be able to break away from the persistent enemy. Hyunmishi even asked the monster to give him at least a little rest, since constant deaths and resurrections tired him. He tried to use his skills and abilities. Sometimes it even seemed to him that he would overwhelm the goblin. But the result of the battle was always the same. Hyunmishi was lying on the ground in a pool of his own blood. Once again sending the guy to a better world, the goblin moved towards his own. The message said that this was a level 20 goblin Kurson. It was no wonder that the guy couldn't cope with him. Kurson reported to his comrade that he had not seen the stupid man for several days. He walked and looked for him everywhere, but could not find him. That's why I returned home. The round-headed goblin said that it was too early to relax, but man is not stupid, but cunning, and you can expect anything from him. Kurson learned that the goblins were in trouble. Someone had poisoned their water, and now many were dying. This news shocked the red-hatted goblin. They haven't had such a tragedy for a long time. There were a lot of people dying. They were carefully looked after, but they died anyway. The wheezing and crying of the dying was unbearable to listen to even for such rude creatures as goblins. Someone, right under the goblins' noses, managed to poison their water. All the fish they raised for food died. No matter how much the goblins thought, they could not establish the reason, who could have done such sabotage, and how to eliminate its consequences. Then Kurson growled that it could only be that person. There was no other option. There was no one else to poison their water. The goblin wondered how a person could find out about their lair. Perhaps he managed to trace it. The goblin growled that the man should have been caught, not killed. At this time, another goblin approached Kurson, apologizing for taking him away from important matters. He told Kurson that the child had been looking for him for a long time, and that's why he dared to disturb him. When the child babbled a barely audible papa, tears rolled down the scary face of the goblin in the red hat. Kurson freaked out and resolutely headed off, only he knew where, not paying attention to the shouts after him. Another goblin grabbed Kurson right in the back, asking where he was going and what he wanted to do with the constantly resurrected man. The goblin began to convince Kurson to forget about revenge. He said that this was the wrong path, and it was the bloodshed that led to the suffering that befell their people. Kurson was told that if the man was left alone, he would no longer have a reason to bother them and ruin their life. The comrades convinced the red-hatted goblin that it was better to run away and find a good place before things got worse. But it seems Kurson has already made his decision and cannot be convinced. He pulled out his curved sword and decisively rushed forward. The other goblins followed him, not losing hope of stopping him. Suddenly the goblin stopped, seeing something. They called Curson over to take a look. It turned out to be one of the scouts who left quite recently. He was clutching a fatal wound on his side with his gnarled paw. Seeing his comrades, he wheezed that it was poison and he was sure that a person did it. Curson also heard this and shouted to his comrades to return home. Curson noted that since the person left traces so clearly, he was trying to lure them into a trap. The goblin told the others to return home. Curson said he would catch the man. Although he saw that the man was gaining levels very quickly, he knew that he was still stronger than him. The goblins again began to ask that Curson return home with them. But the goblin in the red had only responded by saying that he would kill a person with his eyes closed. Seeing the excitement of his comrades, Curson said that he promised them that he would return alive. The goblins had to agree and let their comrade carry out his bloody plan. And then the long-awaited meeting between man and goblin took place. The man arrogantly said that he was going to give the goblin a chance. This only made Curson laugh. The man clarified that he was giving the goblin a chance to die at his hands. The goblin was confused. It seemed that the man was talking complete nonsense. He asked the guy if he was trying to buy time, to which the guy replied that the goblin should think again. Hyun-Nasi told the goblin that if he was going to destroy his family, they would have been dead a long time ago. The guy said that only a couple of goblins have died so far, but if Curson doesn't leave him alone, many more could die. Hyun-Nasi reminded the goblin that he is constantly resurrected, but nothing will stop him from killing goblins. In response to this, the goblin promised to catch the man and cut off all his limbs so that he would not go anywhere. Hyun-Nasi had an answer for that too. He said that he would kill himself and be reborn safe and sound. The guy tried to reason with the goblin. He stated that he could do anything to his family, and it was impossible to stop him. Hyun-Nasi said that he didn't want to harm the goblin's family. But if he continues to pursue him, the guy will kill them all. The goblin howled in horror at the very thought. He closed his eyes for a few seconds. Then he threw his sharp sword at the feet of Hyun-Nasi. The goblin asked if his life was really enough for the guy. The guy replied that he promised not to touch the goblin's family, but would only take his life. Then the goblin growled at the man to keep his word and leave this place after killing him. Hyun-Nasi promised the red-hatted goblin not to harm his people. Feeling the approach of victory, the guy bent down to pick up the goblin's sword. At that very moment a powerful blow fell upon him. With a powerful blow, the goblin threw Hyun-Nasi far to the side. The guy fell to the ground with a crash, realizing that this plan had failed. A goblin thundered above him. He said that the foolish man hoped that he would fall for this. Irundu. The goblin promised that there would be no painless death for a person. To which Hyun-Nasi replied that the goblin had miscalculated, and he should have killed the guy right away. There were reports that health had dropped below 10% and the regeneration perk had been activated. Suddenly, Hyun-Nasi shot the careless goblin in the gut with all his might. The next movement the guy grabbed the freak's thick neck in his hand. The grip turned out to be iron and Curson could barely move. Hyun-Nasi threw the goblin aside. But it was clear that he would not recover so easily. And the guy added that for now he was holding back. And he even gave the goblin another chance. The goblin roared with rage and resentment. He tried to get Hyun-Nasi. But the guy easily grabbed the goblin into his arms and began to do whatever he wanted with him. The goblin was surprised at such incredible strength in a man. It seemed to him that he had wounded the man enough, half to death. Curson wondered how the man was able to recover so quickly from such a severe injury. The goblin realized that the man was hiding his skill and fooled him around his finger. Meanwhile, Hyun-Nasi needed the green creature like dough. Curson could only be amazed at the guy's strength. He could no longer do anything with him. Already the beaten goblin himself still could not understand how Hyun-Nasi managed to defeat him. The guy said that the goblin was simply stupid and careless. Because the goblin always killed him with one blow. They never really fought. And the goblin thought that he could kill the guy at any time. Hyunmu stated that the goblin had lost his guard and become too careless. The goblin growled that the man should reduce his impudence, because he can always end him while he is still on his feet. And the goblin promised to take the guy's head as a reward. For such words, the guy gave the goblin a good kick. It was painful for Kurson to lose himself in such an unenviable position. Hyunmu told the goblin that it was too late for him to dream about the guy's head, time had passed. The goblin stood up and tried to put his paw between the folds of his clothes. Hyunmu said that he was not going to let his guard down as stupidly as the goblin. Kurson began to beg the guy for forgiveness. He began to apologize for taking his life so many times. He even told the guy that without him his family would not be able to live here and would die too. The goblin growled that Hyunmu only wanted to get his life and spare his family. The guy asked if his family would really die if Kurson died. The goblin swore to Hyunmu that this was the holy truth. Then the guy asked, "I wonder if he kills the goblin, will he also get points for his family?" At that moment, the goblin realized that it was all over and there was no point in expecting mercy. The next moment, Hyunmu cut off the head of the red-hatted goblin. The guy was inundated with messages like that. The task, "Enemies on the wooden bridge," is completed, you received a silver chest, which was replaced with a gold one, and the like. But what surprised Hyunmu most was that he was immediately promoted to 3 levels for killing a goblin. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a mosquito fairy appeared. The guy noticed that the fairy disappeared before the fight and appeared immediately after it ended. He invited the fairy to devour the defeated monster. The girl asked what he was looking for in the pockets of a defeated enemy. The guy said he was wondering what made the goblin so strong, and he seemed to have found out what was wrong. But Hyunmu understood that one weapon was not enough to kill the enemy with one blow. The guy still managed to discover the secret of the goblin in the red hat. The hands of the green monster were thickly covered with small runes. At that moment, a message appeared that the Star of Destruction Gaul was leading your hand and something incredible began to happen around the guy. The runes from the goblin's hand mixed with the air whirlwinds and the black ball in the sky. Then sharp black rays from the ball rushed down at breakneck speed. The rays pierced Hyunmu's palms so quickly that he didn't even have time to cry out in pain. A strange symbol appeared on the guy's hand. And the message made it known that he had absorbed part of Gaul's Star of Destruction. From the next message it became known that the guy received a new legendary skill, family. The sun's rays entered the house and gently fell on the bed where Yuming was sleeping. The girl had a dream. It seemed to her that someone was calling her name. They called even louder. Yumin opened her eyes and sat up on the bed in front of her. She saw Hyunmu. The guy asked why she was surprised, because she could hear him opening the door. Yuming muttered that she was asleep and didn't hear anything. She asked the guy if he was hungry and explained that there was little food in the house. She didn't expect him to come today. Yumin said that she would go to the store and buy everything she needed. But the guy stopped her, gently taking her hand. He wanted to talk to Yuming. But he didn't know how to tell her the whole truth. How will she perceive it? Yumin said that Park Yco came and asked if anything special happened with Hyunmu. The girl said she replied that the guy was not here. But she began to wonder what was happening. The more Yuming thought, the more she came to the conclusion that she did not understand at all what was happening. He asked Hyunmu where he had been all this time, and what he was hiding from her. The guy tried to calm her down, but the girl became even more angry. She started screaming that she was tired of waiting for Hyunmu all the time. He constantly disappears somewhere and then appears. Yumin said that she never knows whether the guy will come back again. Hyunmu took the girl's hands and asked her to calm down. She said that he never explains anything to her, and that makes her feel awkward. The guy convinced Yumin that he would tell and explain everything to her. Hyunmu partially understood the girl's explosive reaction. She was involved in many amazing events with the guy. She always tried to help, encourage, cheer him up. No wonder she's so stressed now. Yumin always unquestioningly helped the guy out and supported him in the most unusual situations. Hyunmoo, she realized that he could not live without her. The guy thought that if he hides the future from the girl, something might happen to her, and he will be left alone. Could not even imagine what kind of future awaits humanity in the near future. Hyunmoo, she reminded the girl how he inherited the return stone. He explained to her that the stone leads to a dungeon called Hell. And from time to time he disappears and appears in this place. But Hyunmoo, she doesn't know when this will happen again, and how long he will be gone in real life. Yuming asked the guy if it was possible that one day he would not be able to go back. Hyunmoo, she said that no matter how long he stayed there, he would always come back. And he added that he would like Yuming to be a beacon to which he would always return. The guy's story made a great impression on the girl. The guy hugged Yumin, and she hugged him tightly. She also said that she doesn't want to be just some kind of beacon. Yumin added that no matter what difficulties the guy is in, she will always support him. And she will always do everything in her power to save him if the need arises. Hyunmoo, she remembered that he hadn't even taken a shower since the trip. The girl said that she also hadn't had time to take a shower today. She asked the guy if he wanted to take a shower with her. After these words, Hyunmoo, she was speechless for a while. In the morning the guy was in a great mood, but he had to get down to business. Luckily, it didn't take long to find Park Y. He himself came to Hyunmoo and offered to give him a ride. Park Yco asked the guy how he was doing with raising his level. Hyunmoo, she said that despite some difficulties, everything went well. The guy asked Park Ys about their deal. To which the old man replied that he did not give the guy any promises. But Park Yco added that he was going to raise the purchase price of crystal moss by 15%. To which Hyunmoo said since he is going to raise the price, then it is worth raising it 2 times. The guy said that he did a lot to prove to Park Yco that he is worth something. But the old man apparently believed that Hyunmoo, she had not changed, and did not seem to be going to take him seriously. The guy had nothing to do, all that remained was to demonstrate his superiority once again, so that the old stubborn man would finally begin to respect him. Hyunmoo, she extended his hand and a blinding light flashed on his palm. The light was so powerful that it poured out of the car windows, illuminating everything around. Crystal moss miraculously appeared on the guy's hand. Hyunmoo, she said that he has a monopoly on such valuable crystal moss. He alone can get it. The guy asked Park Yco what he thought would happen if they couldn't reach an agreement. The old man said that Hyunmoo, she was going too far. He was already paying him for moss, like from 5-star dungeons, and now he also offered to raise the price by 15%. To this the guy said that he had no choice and the crystal moss disappeared from his hand. Hyunmoo, she said that he was ready to offer the old man something else. The guy threw a small thing to the old man, which he caught on the fly. Park Yco asked what it was. But the guy said let him open his palm and see for himself. The old man hesitated before opening his hand, as if he was afraid of something. The guy said that Park Yco should consider this thing as collateral. Finally the old man opened his palm. The notification informed him that he had in his hand an Erhast faith, which, when used, temporarily doubled the wearer's senses. Amazed, Park Yco muttered that it was a legendary item. The guy confirmed this. And he added that he knew that someone like the old man knew the value of such things. Hyunmoo sarcastically asked if L and G-Tae gave him anything like that. The guy asked the old man if it had finally dawned on him that he was more useful than the captain. Hyunmoo said that Park Y can keep the ring until he admits that he is more useful than L and G-Tae. The old man was still under the impression that he had so easily received a valuable legendary item. After examining the ring, he informed Hyunmoo that judging by its shape, there should be another one. The guy replied that he didn't know anything about it, he only found one ring. The old man looked at Hyunmoo, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. In the end, Park Yco hid the ring in his breast pocket, saying that someday there would be a second part. Now the old man agreed to pay Hyun-shi double the amount of crystal moss. Park Waiso added that he would pull this off in such a way that the tax authorities would have no idea about it. The message, visible only to Hyun-shi, said that obedience to the Yukulhart could track the owner of the Urhast faith and temporarily reduce the owner's experience gain by 50%. The old man asked if the guy had any other wishes. Hyun-shi did have one request, and the old man granted it without delay. Yu Ming was at school. This day turned out to be overloaded for them. The girl's phone rang and it turned out that Hyun-si was asking her to leave. She said she was busy. But the guy insisted and Yu Ming had to give in. Although she was angry that he was taking her away from work. Hyun-shi was waiting for her at the school gate. And he wasn't alone. The guy arrived in a large expensive car. The amazed girl asked where he got such an expensive car. The guy said that Park Wai-seo lent him and suggested that they arrange a date on the way home. Yu Min asked how the guy managed to drive a car since he doesn't have a driver's license. The girl called Hyun-si a cretin and took him home. The guy thought that the date should have looked a little different. But still, driving such an expensive car with a beautiful girl was an exciting pastime. Soon, Hyun-si and Park Wai-seo decided to spar a little. During the battle, the old man did not fail to describe how convenient it was to exercise in the clan's training centers, and that this prepared the body well for the trials in the dungeons. Hyun-si was depressed because Park Wai-seo again started singing the old song called "Join the clan at any cost." This made the guy start fighting with even more passion, trying to knock these thoughts out of the old man's head. Park Wai continued to list the clan's innumerable benefits, which included advertising, tax services, clothing, housing, training, transportation, accounting, medicine, and legal work. In a word, every whim of the hunter was fulfilled. Taking advantage of the respite after a well-aimed blow, the old man continued to say that fame and money would rain down on Hyun-shi as if from a cornucopia. The guy once again stated that he was not going to join the Tae-sun clan. Numerous attempts to reach the old man were rarely successful, even though he talked more than he fought. Another crushing jump on the old man did not bring the desired effect. Hurt, Hyun-shi rolled to the side and muttered that he thought he had broken his ribs. But the guy was not going to end the fight just yet. The old man took off his shirt, and Hyun-si admired his form at such a respectable age. Park Wai-seo asked where the guy was going to join, since he disdains the Tae-sun clan. To this, Hyun-shi said that there are many powerful clans. One of them is controlled by a great unknown. The fight alternated with idle chatter, and at some point the guy decided to take advantage of it. He almost reached the old man's face, there was just a little bit left. But Park Wai-seo was not only a master of talking. In the ring he also did not pass the hind legs. He praised the guy for his skill, but apparently managed to break his arm. Hyun-shi's health level dropped below 10% and the regeneration process began. The old man watched in amazement as the guy recovered. This happened right before his eyes. Hyun-shi muttered that Park Wai-seo broke his arm on purpose to see how he recovered. In response, the old man said that he was impressed by the guy's growth over the past 2 weeks and asked why he wanted to meet. The guy calmly replied that he just wanted to return Park Wai-seo to his car. The next minute, Hyun-shi asked the old man if he had heard anything about the stars. The old man asked if the guy meant the class system of skill users. Hyun-shi said that's not what this is about. He meant the star of destruction, the star of tears and parts of the stars. The old man said that he had heard about this among the best rankers and even from LNGT. He added that the association, called the Reverse Crusade, uses the Star of Bethlehem as their symbol. Suddenly Park Wai-seo changed the topic of conversation and suggested something to the guy, which greatly surprised him. The old man asked Hyun-shi if he would like to clean out the dungeon. Such an unexpected proposal took the guy by surprise, even a little discouraged. Park Yco said since the guy wants to reach heights like Lee Ji-tae and doesn't want to work for anyone, he should involve other people in his development. Park Y thought that this would be good for the guy anyway. Hyun, she just needs to socialize, acquire useful connections and new acquaintances. The guy thought about this proposal. He understood that it was not without meaning, but it was so unexpected. Park Yco added that no matter where the guy trains, he does not have a single official trip to the dungeon. The old man complained that this is why it is difficult to find information about the guy. But they won't take him seriously until he officially checks into the dungeons. Hyun-mi thought about this sentence. And the more he thought, the more sensible it seemed to him. The guy told Park Yco that he was interested in it, and would think about it. The old man added that after the dungeons, Hyun-mi will receive certain benefits and new experience. Park Yco said that even geniuses have to learn the basics, there's no way around it. The old man promised the guy that he would organize everything himself, and Hyun-mi could only wait. As he was leaving, he muttered that the guy should expect his call soon. It was a place with amazing scenery and modern infrastructure. But for some reason, Hyun-mi seemed unhappy and the beautiful scenery did not please him. His destination was Mount Cheonjae, where the permanent one-star dungeon was located. In this place, newcomers had the opportunity to test their fighting qualities. The crowd around the guy really looked diverse and even a little sad. Was telling something and the guy came closer to listen. The man in the yellow jacket was calling out to registered ability users. Hyun-mi became interested in what was happening, but he could not understand anything yet. The person urged everyone to come closer, not to be shy, otherwise they wouldn't start until the evening. The man began to count people by pointing at them with something. When the person raised her head, Hyun-mi finally saw that it was a girl. The girl introduced herself, saying that she was a caretaker from the Great Unknowns. And her name is Enro Hall and she is glad to meet everyone. Hyun-mi ran his eyes over the girl's figure, and was surprised that he had not been able to establish her gender before. But Call began to explain the situation, but she reeked of fumes so much that the newcomers could not breathe. The girl said that maybe the newcomers don't understand why they need a caretaker. But Howl explained that some newcomers have high self-esteem and come and start fighting with others. This explanation greatly amused Hyun-mi and he began to laugh openly. A caretaker was appointed to prevent unauthorized clashes between participants. The girl added that there would be a mid-rank hunter from each clan. Hyun-mi decided for himself that the girl was quite pretty. But Howl added that if they did not want to deal with her, then it was better for them not to fight among themselves. The newcomers silently listened to the words of the instructor, but the guy noted for himself that it seemed that not everyone liked what the girl was saying. But Howl hoped that everyone knew that the difficulty level of dungeons increases with the number of stars. She also said that there are dungeons that are unchanged and that change. The girl explained that in changing dungeons, the territory changes, and their complexity changes accordingly. And sometimes it is impossible to predict what will happen next. In unchanging dungeons, everything is much simpler and quite predictable. But Howl said that our dungeon is 1 star and unchangeable. And she added that it couldn't be simpler. Suddenly something began to happen to the girl, her face changed sharply. Then she released such a belch that the newcomers almost lost consciousness from her fumes. The girl apologized and said that she had had a little too much yesterday. Hyun-mi was surprised that she was such a nice, thin girl, but like a fire-breathing dragon. Another guy with a square jaw was also surprised by the instructor's confession, but she had already asked for a roll call. The guy introduced himself as Park Se-moon with 2 stars. The 2 girls introduced themselves as Han Na-kyung and Kim So-yeon. Both had 1 star. The guy with the glasses was called Kim Soo-hwan, and also had 1 star. Hyun-mi figured that in a group of 5 people there would be 3 guys and 2 girls. Then the instructor turned her gaze to Hyun-mi and he introduced himself, saying that he had 1 star. The girl's crystal-clear eyes glared at the guy with a heavy gaze. She thought that the instructor could see the contents of his stomach. The girl looked at the guy intently, as if in front of her was not a living person, but some kind of mannequin. She felt uneasy from her gaze and from the scene in general. Finally, the girl asked that his name was Kang Hyun. But Hal again began to stare at the guy, as if studying some rare living creature under a microscope. She was already covered in sweat and decided that the girl seemed to suspect something. Then she asked if the guy was from Seonji Elementary School. She just shook his head negatively and thought to himself, it's good that at least she started talking, otherwise it was pretty creepy. The girl said that he couldn't remember the guy, but it was probably due to a hangover. Then she asked about his equipment. Hyun-mi extended his hand forward. Energy flashes sparkled around her. And in the guy's hand was an ordinary gray stick. The girl whistled in amazement. No one has yet entered a dungeon with an ordinary stick, even if it was a 1-star dungeon. But Hal noted that the guy has an interesting ability, but the stick is not the right weapon for dungeons. To which Hyun-mi replied that this is not an ordinary stick, but a special one, received from a goblin. At that moment, the square-jawed guy couldn't stand it, and yelled that Hyun-mi was making fun of him. Park Se-moon continued to be indignant that Hyun-mi was not serious all the time. He asked Hyun-mi how he was going to beat the monsters with a regular stick. To prove his serious intentions and set an example, the square-jawed guy showed off a bunch of his weapons. Among the various deadly toys was a double-edged sword. Park Se-moon roared that you need to buy normal weapons, and not all kinds of rubbish. He pulled his sword forward and said that even guys with 2 stars worse than him should not neglect a good weapon. At this time, Hall quickly dived under the arm of a guy with a square jaw. The girl made a lightning-fast grab and performed a technique. In the next moment, Park Se-moon's 100 kilograms of weight flew into the air, and the sword flew out of his hands. But Hal deftly picked up the sword on the fly, while the square-jawed guy fell to the ground with the roar and clatter of his various weapons. The girl towered over the defeated Park Se-moon with a sword in her hand. The guy with the square jaw was seriously scared. But Call turned to him officially and asked if he had gone crazy. The girl reminded that before entering the dungeon one should not draw a weapon, otherwise one might scare ordinary visitors who came to admire nature. But Hall said that she understands that they are beginners, but they should know the basics of safety. Then the girl complained that because of Park Se-moon's stupid behavior, she had to perform acrobatic stunts during a terrible hangover. After giving the square-jawed guy a good scolding, Hall gave him her hand as he muttered an apology. Hyun-mi answered to himself that the girl fights well. It is clear that the girl was much inferior to Park Yco, but it turned out that the average rank of a hunter of a large clan was quite nothing. Hyun-mi thought to himself that it would be a good idea to test this girl in a more serious situation. This idea seemed very successful and far-reaching to the guy. After the test, it would be possible to see if Hall can be as useful as the old man. At this time, something began to happen on the side of the road behind the guy. Sharp ears first appeared from the pile of dirt, and the pile itself began to increase in size before our eyes. Then the pile turned into a stooped, dirty figure. This time, for some reason, Hyun-mi's instincts did not warn him of the danger. The creature flashed its narrow slits of eyes, showing its terrible bestial grin, and disappeared between the trees. Meanwhile, the guys were approaching the dungeon. They were looking forward to the adventure, but on the other hand they were worried about hitherto unknown dangers. The 5, led by instructor and Ogal, passed through the cordon that surrounded the dungeon on all sides. Hyun-mi walked through the cordon with his head held high. He believed that all the horrors of the dungeon would not make him even break a sweat. But the sharp metallic sound of the clanging bolt of the door closing after the guys made the whole 5 shudder. The guys realized that the doors had closed behind them, and now the way back was cut off. The only way to move forward was forward. All 5 people involuntarily tensed and imagined possible dangers that awaited them somewhere ahead. But Hal looked back to understand why the guys hesitated. The girls saw their confused and somewhat depressed faces. Except that Hyunma, she looked rather at ease, as if he had gone for a walk. The girl tried to cheer up the guys and shouted for them to follow her forward. But Hal said with a smile that what the guys came for was in front of them in the dungeon. She also said that the further the guys went into the jungle, the more goblins they would meet. The girl asked her group if there were anyone among them who knew how to clear the dungeon. Park Se-moon stepped forward and said that the task is considered closed once the return crystal is received. The instructor nodded affirmatively. And she added that in the jungle there is a cave full of goblins. In it, beginners will be able to find the Stone of Return. The story about the Stone of Return reminded Hyun-shi of his own adventures in hell. But Gall said that she would not interfere with the children's actions until they found themselves in a desperate situation. So they shouldn't expect support from her in fights with goblins. When the instructor gave the command to start, Park Se-moon gathered everyone around him to give some advice. The guy with the square jaw said that since goblins have a strong sense of smell and can smell people from afar, everyone should cover themselves with grass. He also said not to forget about the head to protect against snakes. Hyunma was surprised by such advice, although the guys listened to them eagerly. The guy said that the advice was somehow strange and ineffective. Park Se-moon was very hurt by this. He stated that he learned about them on the channel of the famous hunter streamer Wild Breath. The square-jawed guy growled at Hyunma that he didn't even have equipment, and still dared to doubt the knowledge of others. And Gall intervened in the boys' squabble. She stopped Hyunma from arguing with his teammate, and asked what seemed strange to him about the advice. The guy replied that since it was said that goblins have an excellent sense of smell, it is not difficult for them to distinguish dried grass from fresh grass, and rubbing it with grass is a stupid activity. Hyunma also said that you should not worry so much about your head as about your knees, because dwarf goblins prefer to hit the knees. Park Se-moon roared at the guy that he thought he was the smartest, but he got punched in the gut by the instructor, who seemed to like beating such a lout with a baton. Putting the bully in his place, the instructor said that if she was allowed to express her opinion, then Park Se-moon's advice would have been good 10 years ago. The girl stated that the blogger mentioned by Park left the one-star dungeons a long time ago, and is now working at the highest levels. And during this time, a lot has changed and these tips really are no longer working. At the same time, the girl said that Hyunmu said sensible things. But Gall asked the guy how he knew so much about goblins. The girl stated that although he was a person with no experience, it looked like he had hunted goblins a lot. Hyunma said that he simply read a lot about goblins before going into the dungeon. But Gall again began to drill the guy with her prickly gaze. Hyunmu said that it is forbidden to visit dungeons illegally, and this is his first dungeon, so all his knowledge is from books and the World Wide Web. Park Se-moon yelled, which means the guy was also Googling everything. Just at this time, the guys first heard a distant rumble, which grew stronger with every second. Judging by the wide trail in the thicket and the raised cloud of branches and leaves, the guys realized that some kind of creature was rushing towards them at full speed. Only when the monster came close were the guys able to see the black, rapidly rushing shadow and burning eyes. Hyunmu looked back reluctantly. The open mouth of a goblin with 2 rows of sharp teeth descended directly on a group of people. Even the instructor tensed from surprise, although she could have walked through this dungeon blindfolded. The goblin quickly dived at a detachment of people who, apparently, were confused. The goblin, in anticipation of imminent reprisals against the uninvited guests, even stuck out his tongue in flight. At this time, Hyunmu put his knee exactly in the flight path of the green monster. Park Se-moon was speechless with amazement. He didn't expect such agility from a guy with 1 star. The rest only had time to gasp and then looked at the unsuccessful goblin, as the guy's knee changed his flight path. When the goblin hit the ground, everyone let out a sigh of relief. Hyunmu looked back at the guys. The guy asked if anyone else had any complaints about his stick. Someone muttered that he didn't even bother her. But Gall just clicked her tongue. She thought that this newcomer seemed to be not as simple as he seemed at first. She regretted that she could not remember where he studied. Nevertheless, the girl reprimanded Hyam as she, saying that if he continued in the same spirit, a fight could not be avoided. And she added that it was worth putting the disputes aside, since goblins had appeared. The group heard a loud noise again. Now it seemed that not just one individual was running, but a whole herd. And indeed, goblins soon appeared. The desire to shed blood was visible in their flaming eyes. The fragile girl with a ponytail was the first to react and got involved in the fight. The guys grabbed whatever weapons they had and prepared to fight. The goblins looked somehow pitiful, and this gave the guys even more confidence. The black-haired girl immediately set to work on the nearest enemy. In the blink of an eye, she spun her terrible weapon on her finger. Then she invested her whole body and powerfully threw her hand forward, simultaneously unclenching her fingers. The energy of his entire body's movement was transferred to the weapon. The goblin received a huge gaping wound in his side, and it was clear from everything that he was no longer a tenant. The guy with glasses wielded a sword, trying to chop another green monster into pieces. He also gave it his all, and it paid off. In general, the guys were not at a loss, and the opponents felt a worthy rebuff. The square-jawed guy also wielded a sword. His enormous strength did not give the goblins a chance after they fell under his hand. Green, bloody arms and legs flew in all directions. No Gaul seemed to be watching the fight indifferently. At least the girl didn't make a single move. In fact, the girl clearly analyzed the movements of each of the guys, as well as their emotions and behavior. Everyone worked harmoniously, no one was scared or confused. But Gaul decided that at this rate the dungeon would be cleared quite easily, and the guys would only get a few scratches at most. But the girl felt something unusual that even frightened her. True, she could not yet understand where the threat came from. Then Gaul began to remember that even before the start of the battle, the goblins were scared half to death. The instructor thought that a couple of novice hunters could not scare the seasoned goblins so much. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by a loud, heartbreaking scream that made her blood run cold. But Gaul rushed as fast as she could to where the terrible scream was coming from. The out-of-breath girl growled what was the matter, why were they shouting? A girl from her group actually screamed. True, she screamed not from pain, but from the horror of what she saw. Before the girl's eyes was a dead goblin tied to a post. At first glance it was clear that he was being tortured. Beyond that stood a whole forest of poles with goblins tied to them. The goblins were all dead, and their bodies were a terrible sight. One of the guys asked if this was normal for this dungeon. But the majority stood silently, their mouths open. They didn't expect such horror from a one-star dungeon. But Gaul yelled that the training was over, an emergency had occurred. She told everyone to stay close to her, and their goal now is to leave the dungeon as soon as possible. The goblins weren't just killed and tortured. Their bodies were still abused after death and mutilated as much as possible. Whatever it was, people, or something else, it posed a huge threat to all members of the group. Therefore, Gaul immediately decided to leave the tests until the next time, and try to leave the dungeon as soon as possible. At this time, she realized that only 4 of her 5 remained. The girl asked the guys where Hyam was. But it turned out that no one had seen him for some time. But for the first time in a long time, Gaul felt panic. She was responsible for each team member. But the girl professionally pulled herself together and rushed to search for the missing guy. The goblin in the red hat heard screams calling for Hyam. As soon as he heard these screams, the goblin became extremely furious. He heard the name of his offender, his blood enemy. To understand where Hyam went, you have to go back in time. Fortunately, we can do this. It won't be far back in time. For about an hour. Around the start of the fight. Just when a serious battle began and the guys had no time to look around, they destroyed their superior enemy. But Gaul was busy watching the fight of inexperienced guys. To Hyun-shi, such a fight seemed like kindergarten. I didn't even want to dirty my stick for such a fight. True, the guy killed several green creatures, but solely out of curiosity. Although, when Hyun-shi saw their weapons and the complete lack of battle strategy, he winced in disgust. The guy understood why Gaul was so calm and indifferent. But the guys fought with all their might. This was a real battle for them, and their first battle at that. But Gaul was also busy, taking her position as an indifferent observer. The girl yawned from time to time, and Hyun-shi noted to himself that yesterday she seemed to have not limited herself to ordinary drinking. Hyun-shi got bored and decided to do more serious things that were more in line with his experience. The guy decided to use his new skill. To avoid prying eyes, Hyun-shi went deeper into the forest. The skill had not yet been tested, and the guy was impatient to finally use it. This was his new skill called Family, which he gained during his last visit to Hell. The green paw reminded Hyun-shi of past events. The other paw was made of metal and ended in a sharp hook. In front of Hyun-shi stood a strong goblin wearing a red hat, who was called Kurson and whom he killed in Hell. The guy told the goblin that he was giving him his first task. And he added that he hoped that the goblin would do everything quickly and efficiently. The family skill, which the guy received after defeating Kurson, allowed him to resurrect the old goblin. And a pleasant bonus for Hyun-shi was that he could resurrect Kurson not only in Hell, and he could do this until the goblin received critical wounds. The guy admired this skill. In addition, he liked to see his long-time tormentor in front of him, who was forced to obey him unquestioningly. Hyun-shi ordered the goblin in the red hat to kill all his relatives in the local forests. Kurson growled in impotent rage, but he could not resist the guy. He tried to dodge, saying that he was not going to shed the blood of his relatives. Then Hyun-shi calmly declared that if Kurson disobeyed, he would slaughter his entire family. The goblin could only sparkle his eyes, click his fangs and sputter. Meanwhile, the first potential victim appeared, which Kurson was supposed to destroy. A huge, dull-looking goblin, dressed in some kind of rags, looked out of the bushes and stared at those talking. The guy nodded to Kurson that his work had come to him. Kurson turned his head in horror towards the other goblin. Whatever creatures the green, pointy-eared creatures were, they seemed to be disgusted by the task of pointlessly slaughtering each other. But there was nothing to do, and the goblin in the red hat sadly wandered towards his victim. At this time, Hyun-shi experienced some strange feelings of anxiety, despair, and pity. It seems that the whole point was in the family skill, which really united the guy with the goblin into a family, and the emotions of the green creature were partially transferred to him. It turns out that even the most excellent skill had its downside and its disadvantages. Nevertheless, Hyun-shi continued to observe the actions of his subordinate. Kurson came close to the big stupid goblin dressed in rags and winced in disgust. The red-hatted goblin couldn't believe that this stupid, disgusting creature was his kinsman. The goblin couldn't even talk, and besides he wasn't armed. Kurson punched him without much mercy. The enemy flew to the side from the first blow of the goblin in the red hat. Kurson roared that such a dumb, stupid nonentity in rags could not be his kinsman. A goblin in a red hat, shouting that it was not a goblin, cut off his opponent's head. Hyun-shi noted that Kurson seemed to have a terrible hatred for his own kind. The goblin in the red hat seemed to have gone crazy. He kept saying that he didn't kill a goblin. Apparently, another potential victim has appeared. In fact, even two. In front of Kurson stood two more stupid, ugly creatures in a rough approximation of clothing. There was no need to ask the goblin a second time. He attacked the new arrivals with wild, incredible anger. During the flight, Kurson roared something about vile creatures that he was going to do away with. The two goblins looked in bewilderment at the third one, who was flying at them, furiously waving his sword. Careless goblins flew in different directions. Wielded his sword so furiously that even Hyun-shi was splashed with blood, which flew in fountains in all directions. The guy could only wonder with what frenzy the goblin in the red hat destroyed his own relatives. Hyunmushi understood that the goblin was trying to prove something, but what exactly the guy could not understand. He praised Kurson's zeal and told him he would be gone for a while. At this time, the rest of the group, led by Enro Gall, wandered through the forest and tried to shout to Hyunmushi. The instructor kept trying to drive away the thought that behind the next tree or boulder they would find the boy's lifeless body. But then Hyunmushi's head appeared from the bushes, and soon he himself appeared in complete and unharmed condition. But Gall attacked the guy with rage, reproaching him for leaving and acting without permission. Soon the girl calmed down a little. She was consoled that everyone was at least alive and well. In turn, Hyunmushi asked why everyone looked so scared and lost. But Gall said that there was no time to explain and that they were going to leave the dungeon as soon as possible. And she added that the guy should not play any more tricks and stay close. Soon the return stone was found and almost everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They didn't even want to pay attention to the fact that the area around the stone was generously strewn with the bodies of goblins. And Gall herself was most happy. She understood more than anyone the danger looming over their group and, moreover, bore personal responsibility for each member of the team. While everyone was silently staring at the stone, Park Se-moon quickly rushed forward. As he ran, the square-jawed guy wailed that he wanted to get out immediately, and could no longer endure the horror of this dungeon. The instructor shouted after the guy to calm down and pull himself together. It was much wiser and safer to act deliberately and collectively. But Park Se-moon did not pay attention to any arguments and rushed forward without understanding the road. The leg of a guy running at high speed caught on something unnoticeable but hard. Then all 100 kg of Park's southeast moon rose into the air and he flew head first. The noise from the fall was incredible. One could only guess whether it was the cracking stones or the bones of the guy with the square jaw. Park Se-moon found himself in the hands, that is, in the clutches of a goblin in a red hat. This state of affairs plunged the square-jawed guy into utter despair. Kurson stood while Park and raised his prosthesis, ending in a sharp hook, over his head. But Gall quickly rushed off to help the guy. The other guys were still digesting what they had seen. The girl tried to prevent the seemingly inevitable, and quickly shortened the distance separating her from the unfolding tragedy. The hook had already begun to land on Park Se-moon's head. The guy closed his eyes in horror. But Gall, so as not to waste a moment, took out her weapon as she walked. And the girl made it. She parried the monster's powerful blow, managing to reach it at the last moment. The girls from the group screamed in indescribable horror. Who could have imagined such a thing in the easiest and simplest dungeon? The bespectacled man also screamed in time with the girls, although not so shrilly. Hyunmushi silently watched what was happening, trying not to miss a single moment of the battle. A girl with a knife in each hand was trying to get at an unknown monster. Kurson, however, also held his weapon tightly in his hand and was not going to give up. The fight promised to be exciting. But Gall fiercely attacked the enemy. The goblin in the red hat managed to parry the blow, and the girl flew to the side. Hyunmushi mentally rubbed his hands. From the very beginning he wanted to test the girl in a good fight. And now such an opportunity has happened. The girl fought bravely and prudently, and did not make any serious mistakes. Kurson's grin alone was worth it, and the gleam of his evil eyes was worth it. And the roar escaping from the powerful chest could make an ordinary person faint. But Gall was resolutely eager to fight. She was given strength by her concern for the life of Park, for whom she was responsible, as well as for the rest of the guys. The family skill allowed Hyunshi to control Kurson's actions. But the problem was that if the controlled subject is higher in level, then the control is not complete. But increase the impact on the goblin Hyunma, she could destroy his family with the help of threats. But the guy was thinking about something else. He remembered the massacre he had seen recently. This is how Kurson must hate his tribe in order to mock even the corpses of defeated opponents. It was difficult to look under the goblin's skull. Hyunmu, she looked around and saw that the guys were silently watching the battle with their mouths open and not even trying to move. Then the guy returned his gaze to the battlefield. It seems that none of the opponents have yet received an advantage. Hyunmu, she was very interested to see what the middle rank of the great unknowns, no Gaul, was capable of. The level 26 goblin was a serious test for the girl, and the guy wanted to know if she could defeat him. Kurson, apparently, decided to give in, although there were no prerequisites for this. The instructor screamed after the monster, trying to stop him. It looks like a goblin in a red hat rushed towards a group of people paralyzed from immense horror. But Gaul rushed to intercept the swift beast. She almost made it. Or rather, she had time, but she set herself up. A fountain of blood sprayed out. Kurson managed to reach the girl with his long sword. This came as a surprise to everyone watching. This could change the situation dramatically. But Gaul was furious that the unfortunate goblin could wound her. At this moment, Hyunmu, she thought that he would be disappointed if the girl lost to the goblin. But Gaul decided that it was time to put an end to this overgrown goblin and decided to use her skill. The girl used the acceleration skill. The next second, everyone lost sight of the girl. The goblin in the red hat was also taken aback by the sudden disappearance of the instructor. Hyunmu, she tried to mentally convey the command to the goblin to get out faster. Either the guy managed to reach the green head with his thoughts, or the goblin himself realized that delay is fraught with death. But Kurson took off running, although he did not know which way to run. And the girl overtook him. Using the skill, she even had to wait for the goblin to turn around to face her. Then Gaul held some kind of reception. Neither the goblin, nor Hyunmu, nor even the others could see him. It just seemed like the air was stirring. Then there were